Hey guys, today we ease out of harbour with the tide tugging the hull and gulls heckling you from the pilings, and you realise with that small hollow thump under your ribs that you didn't pack a pantry. You stepped onto a floating gamble. You grip the tarred rope taste salt and a polite hint of fear and pretend you're ready even as a mischievous voice whispers that, on a voyage like this, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. We'll keep the pace slow and friendly tonight, unspooling the story like a line paid over the side, letting wind and bell and water set your rhythm until your shoulders loosen. I'll do the heavy lifting. You just breathe with the swell and listen to the ship's wooden heartbeat. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I love seeing the ship's company spread across the world. You plant your feet wide as the deck lists, learning the ship's slow heartbeat. Creak, sigh, slap of wave, quick skitter of lines, and the tiny percussion of dried peas rattling somewhere in a bag. The ocean smells like iron and brine and last week's onions. The cook, who looks like he was carved from smoked ham, shoos you from his domain with a ladle that has seen things. Later he grunts, which is ship speak, for we're stretching everything. You take that in like an order and let the wind comb your hair into a new and unfortunate style. A joke slips across your mind: if this kitchen gets any smaller, it'll be a pocket, but you keep it to yourself out of respect for the ladle. A mainstream fact rolls in with the spray for centuries of blue water voyaging. Your staples are brutally simple: hardtack, biscuits, salted beef, or pork dried peas, or beans, a wedge of hard cheese oatmeal, and casks of beer, wine, or water that ages about as gracefully as a banana on a radiator. The logic is arithmetic. The sea respects maximum calories per cubic foot, maximum shelf life per prayer offered. Everything else, fruit, greens, eggs, vanishes faster than your patience on bilge pump duty. But here's a quirky tidbit to chew while the rigging hums some crews opened with pluck days in the first week organ meats eaten early, before they turned mutinous while others swore by onion and vinegar tonics as morning morale shots. Old hands kept pocket spices, nutmeg, pepper, scrapings of citrus peel pinched from the officer's pantry to doctor their bowls when the cook wasn't looking. And yes, there are whispered accounts of plum duffer pudding so dense that if you dropped it, the ship might gain a knot. You practice your polite face just in case dessert arrives with a thud. Historians still argue whether the average sailor's caloric intake actually met the brutal labour of hauling, reefing, pumping, and corking. Ration tables from navies look generous on paper, yet surgeons' journals grumble that much of it arrived rancid, riddled with weevils, or mysteriously light after a long chain of samplers ashore. Was it 3,000 calories for? Or an optimistic fiction that blew away with the first gale? You picture scholars debating it like sailors over a backgammon board, fair foul or fiddled, and you make a mental note: numbers at sea behave like eels. The bell strikes and wood smoke drifts from the galley funnel. You descend to peek not too close at the brick and iron range chained to the deck. The cook coaxes a sullen flame with chips shaved from a barrel-stave sacrilege you won't report. He's simmering peas to near surrender and reviving a slab of salt beef in a cauldron of seawater turned soup. He swears the extra brine keeps the meat honest. You don't ask what dishonesty looks like in a steak older than your haircut. Another light joke bubbles up: this stew has a birth certificate, but you decide the galley is not a comedy club. Back at the rail, your eyes soften over the marching fields of swell. A new sensory anchor settles in the rope's soft burn in your palm, the bell's bronze hush, and the thin musical whine of wind squeezing the shrouds. Your tongue tastes like iron and biscuit dust, which, to be fair, is the same flavour profile as most sailor memoirs. You imagine the first bite of hardtack part ritual, part dental exam, part tiny lawsuit against the baker who fired it into immortality at the Navy Board bakehouse. Let's set another mainstream marker steady as a compass card by the 18th century. Navies formalised weekly rations, the Royal Navy especially spelling out pounds of biscuit beef, or pork, pints of beer, measures of oatmeal, butter and cheese. Predictability arrived, but joy did not. Logs and medical notes sketch a truth you feel in your joints. Monotony, chilled morale and deficiency diseases stalked the decks like quiet creditors. Now a more offbeat crumb to keep you awake, sailors often toasted their biscuit over a lantern to chase out the weevils which would obligingly show themselves like late customers in a bakery. The bugs were shrugged off as extra protein, a joke that stops being funny exactly when it becomes breakfast. Some crews nicknamed biscuit molar stones, others sheet iron, and at least one rhyming soul called it fossil thunder, You tap yours on the rail and swear the rail taps back. Still, scholars debate the timing and uptake of the famous citrus cure for scurvy, a controversy bubbling beneath our entire voyage. Success appeared in fits and starts praised and then forgotten. Was it lemon-lime sauerkraut or just better logistics that finally turned the tide? Was it the acid, the vitamin C, or a bundle of improvements arriving together like a well-drilled gun crew? You let the question hang like a damp sail. It will matter when cheeks the colour of parchment start to bloom again after weeks at sea. Evening bruises the sky with purples and pewter. Lanterns wink along the deck like sleepy fireflies. A faint clatter from below hints that wooden bowls are being set out. Spoons will soon trace small moons through cloudy broth. The boatswain's voice slides down the companionway listing tomorrow's chores with the cheerful menace of a tax reminder. You lean into the rail as if it were an old friend who doesn't mind biscuit crumbs on their coat. The ship exhales. You exhale with it. Here's the map for our midnight tasting tour. We'll graze across the staples that kept bodies moving and tempers mostly in check edible bricks, brined mysteries dried greens, masquerading as peas, liquid courage that aged into accidental vinegar, and the rare miracle of something fresh in a wooden world. We'll keep the cadence slow and drowsy, like working the graveyard shift literally while the ocean does the walking for you. Expect a fact in every bowl, a curious garnish, and a little scholarly turbulence to keep the sails from slatting. Just when you find that drift between wake and doze, a shadow passes the steward with the ration keys. He counts biscuits the way a sheriff counts stars, and you get the feeling you'll need to be on good behaviour if you want the corner pieces. You tuck your tin cup under your arm, square your shoulders to the wind, and listen to the bell's last note dissolve into the dark. But the next duty was even stranger. You meet your breakfast like you meet a minor enemy with a polite nod, squared shoulders, and a plan not to chip a tooth. The hardtack waits in its canvas bag, square slabs the colour of old parchment, each one pricked with neat docking holes, and if you're unlucky, a few extra tunnels courtesy of creatures who enjoyed the ration before you did. You tap a biscuit against the rail. The rail wins. You try again, because hope is a sailor's second ration. The biscuit wins too. You consider saluting it, then decide your pride has suffered enough for one morning. Mainstream fact first, steady as a compass card ship's biscuit, also called hardtack sea biscuit, or pilot bread, was flour and water. Sometimes a pinch of salt if the baker felt fancy. The dough was mixed, stiff, rolled thin, docked with holes to vent steam and baked low and long until nearly every ghost of moisture was driven out. Then it was baked again, and sometimes again, so time itself had nowhere to hide. In naval bakehouses at Portsmouth and Deptford, or across the water at Cherbourg and Cartagena, bakers turned out literal mountains of the stuff stamped with crowns or anchors, dried in airy lofts and packed tight into casks. Biscuit was not cuisine. Biscuit was logistics, a stony promise that calories would still exist long after lemons, onions, and optimism were gone. You learn the ritual like tying a bowline. First you wrap a biscuit with the butt of your knife. The knife complains. Then you drown the square in water, small beer or broth, until it softens from roof tile to merely stubborn cracker. An old hand shows you the lantern trick hold biscuit near the galley light, and any sleepy weevils will wander out for warm air. You tap them off like tardy passengers missing their stop. It's not exactly appetizing, but out here appetizing is a land word. Out here you're playing a game called Be Practical and Live. Your sensory anchors shift with the routine, the dry rasp of canvas over wood, the powdery sigh when you crack biscuit into a bowl, a faint papery smell like the breath of an old library. The rigging hums a low note you feel in your ribs. Crumbs skitter across your jacket and sparkle for a second in a shaft of light, a tiny constellation that dissolves as quickly as it appears. You brush yourself off and realise you've just seasoned your clothes. Here's a quirky tidbit you wouldn't expect from such ascetic food sailors carved keepsakes from hardtack. You handle one and see where bored hands scratched initials, tiny ships, even crooked hearts into the chalky face, then rubbed lamp oil over the lines to make the graffiti last. Elsewhere and in other wars, soldiers mailed hardtack like postcards addresses, penciled on the porous surface postage grudgingly accepted by a clerk with a sense of humour. On long glassy days, biscuit became game pieces for checkers and shuffleboard. Lunch doubled as a tournament and the winner earned first ladle from the pot. Nothing makes a man competitive like the promise of an extra spoonful. Back in the galley, the cooker man whose face looks slow-cooked introduces you to Biscuit's alter egos. Skilligalee, he says, dropping crushed biscuit into a pan with fat and a ribbon of molasses. It sizzles browns and decides to masquerade as dessert. Then there's burgoo, a porridge of biscuit broth and whatever else can be convinced to join. On good days it's hearty, on bad days it's beige. And either way it fills a watch without talking back. Someone mentions Flaming Tommy, which is just a dramatic name for biscuit toasted over a flame until it smells almost like bread again. Almost. A joke drifts across your mind. It's toast. If toast forgot it was bread, and you let it pass like a polite wave. Another plank of fact to nail down ration tables in the long 18th and 19th centuries made biscuit the backbone of a sailor's calories, often a pound per person per day. The numbers look clean on paper, like a parade seen from a balcony. But paper doesn't sweat and paper doesn't taste damp. At sea, casks swell and seams open. Holds breathe mildew. Heat and salt write their own arithmetic. Some casks arrive perfect. Others go slack at the edges, and a few host bustling insect republics with a constitution you do not wish to read. You learn to tap a biscuit and listen like a carpenter reading the grain. A good one answers with a small confident knock. One of the old hands shares a dawn trick: lay a cracked biscuit in the lee of the galley chimney, and it will drink in just enough heat to seem friendly without turning soft. You test the law, then bite. Somehow it's both warm and dry, a contradiction that makes your brain pause and your mouth grateful. Hunger is a remarkable flavour enhancer. You decide not to become the ship's food philosopher and simply take the win. Now for a pinch of scholarly debate to keep your mind awake while your jaw does the work was hardtack, as nutritionally adequate as the tables promised. Historians still argue whether the refining of flour stripped too many vitamins, whether double or triple baking altered digestibility, whether the caloric totals ignored spoilage and lost to vermin, and whether the neat ledgers in victualling yards reflected what actually reached common mess tables. Some point to surgeons' journals complaining of imperfect biscuit and injured casks. Others note that the biscuit's very dryness protected crews against moulds and toxins that thrive in damp bread. Depending on the port, the season, and the purser's ethics, your daily ration may be anything from dependable to philosophical. You find your rhythm chip with the knife splash with the ladle count to 40 like a quiet prayer, then eat. It doesn't taste bad. It tastes like patience. A smear of hard cheese turns it almost companionable. A dash of vinegar wakes it up. A dunk in small beer makes it less stubborn and more sociable. Every so often a joker claims the weevils are extra protein, and you explain that you too are open to new sources of protein, as long as they don't wave hello first. One laugh is usually enough to end that tradition for the day. There is craft worth respecting in the making of the stuff, and you give the baker his due. The flour must be dry and clean, the dough mixed firm, the sheet rolled thin and docked with holes, the bake slow enough to chase heat into the centre without inviting a char. The second bake is an exorcism of moisture. In some ports the biscuits rest in lofts for weeks, to finish drying, aging like pale bricks you can actually eat. Then comes packing casks lined with paper, or cloth layers set tight lids sealed with pitch, and the lot stowed where sweat and bilge cannot easily reach. Baker, cooper, purser each has a job, and if any one of them naps on duty, you will meet the result at breakfast. There's a quiet economy to it all. Hardtack asks you to finish the cooking at the last moment with whatever heat, liquid and optimism you can muster. It hands you energy without frivolity, food without plot twists. And yet in that simplicity, a small theatre persists. The testing, tap, the softening, soak, the lantern. Ritual, the cook's glance of approval, when you manage not to crunch like a horse. If food is memory, hardtack is a filing cabinet. Plain, square and reliable, waiting for the label you'll write when you're home again. You finish, set your spoon down and discover your jaw feels pleasantly warm, as if you'd chewed through a short rope for exercise. The deck breathes. The hull answers with a hush. Above a block squeals. After gull laughs. Crumbs perform a brief ballet in a shaft of light and vanish into the ordinary dust of ocean life. You expected to hate this square veteran, and instead learn to respect it like a gruff shipmate who doesn't talk much but always shows up. On land, you'll dream of cherries, butter and bread that yields like a handshake. Out here, you'll settle for a promise kept. The bell marks the change of watch. From the galley, a new scent escapes, darker, meatier, confident in a way biscuit never is. You stand, stretch, and follow the smell with the obedient interest of a well-trained hound, imagining the salted world inside the next cask like a moon pulled up from the bilge. But the next duty was even stranger. You follow that darker scent like a homing pigeon with good manners down past the ladder, past the barrel hoops that shine like old moons until you're nose to nose with the ship's other main character, salt beef and salt pork stacked in casks like quiet, heavy planets. The cook hauls a hook through a bung and fishes out a slab the colour of a winter sunset brown edged into ruby glossy with brine. You brace your feet as the hull sighs, and the brine in the tub shifts like a tiny tide. A few stray peppercorns ride the surface like ships in miniature. A strip of fat trembles as if it's listening to the wind. You swallow partly from hunger, partly from the sheer authority of all that salt whispering, "I will keep you alive, but on my terms." Mainstream fact to set your plate straight for centuries of blue water voyaging, late medieval into the age of sail, and even into the age of steam. The daily ration in many fleets alternated between salt beef and salt pork, often a pound of meat per person, when the purser's arithmetic went your way. The cuts were preserved months before sailing, butchered into large chunks, packed in coarse salt submerged in strong brine, and barreled tight under hoops and pitch. When the day's cask was broached, the cook soaked the pieces to coax out the ocean they had absorbed, then boiled them in great chained coppers until the fibres stopped acting like rope. It wasn't delicacy. It was engineering protein preserved by the oldest chemistry a kitchen owns. Your senses tune themselves to a new anchor, the sweet metal smell of hot brine, the low confessional hiss of a lid lifting from the kettle, the thud of a ladle against iron like a slow bell, and behind it all the soft, repetitive slap of waves against planks, a patient metronome that tells you dinner will be ready when the ocean says so. A thin rime of salt crystals freckles the rim of the tub. You dab one with your fingertip and taste the entire logic of preservation in a grain. Without salt, meat would bloom with life you didn't invite. With salt, it goes to sleep and waits for you. Sailors named everything they tolerated and the meat earned nicknames as soon as it touched the deck. Salt horse, you hear, though. No horse went into the barrel. The joke is about texture, not species. Old mahogany, someone says, when a particularly venerable piece lumbers into the pot. On British ships, Banyan Day meant a day without meat named, so the story goes for vegetarian merchants of the East, whose habits impressed a few practical quartermasters. When Banyan arrived, some men cheered for a break. Others grumbled that peas and piety couldn't replace a slab that fought back. You decide to be ecumenical, you'll take the slab and the peas and call it diplomacy. There's a choreography to the cask. The cooper's craft meets the butcher's intent meets the purser's ledger, all in this circle of staves. A good barrel keeps a good seal swells right in damp air and resists the temptations of time and temperature. The brine must sit strong enough to intimidate microbes, but not so tyrannical that the meat becomes salted wood. When the cook opens a cask, he reads it like a letter from shore. Is the brine clear? And bright are the pieces square and sound, do they smell like duty rather than drama? He nods or frowns with a priest's economy of expression, then orders the soak an hour if the tide of tasks runs high, overnight if fortune smiles. Fat plank number 2, nailed down with a steady hand, rations were scheduled with a predictability that made the weeks feel like a wheel. Beef one day, pork the next, fish if stores allowed, always with peas or beans and the inevitable biscuit. The boiling done in great coppers chained to the galley hearth served double duty, turning a brute of a cut into something your jaw could negotiate, and purifying the water used for cooking. Meat went in salted, came out soft enough to argue with, and brought along a broth rich enough to stand a spoon. If onions survived the last port, they joined the dance like minor nobility. If not, pepper, mustard, or vinegar tried to sing harmonies. Now a quirky tidbit to season the story, some crews swore the pork was singing the fat popping in the pot, with a cheerful hiss like distant applause. Men would guess the tune and claim fortunes based on the rhythm. Another old hand insists the best pieces hide at the bottom of the cask where time naps, so he volunteers to haul from the depths with the air of a hero. On lean voyages, cooks freshened tired brine by throwing in a fist of new salt, and if they could charm the purser a bay leaf or 2 culinary theatre that lifted spirits nearly as much as it altered flavour. You watch the bay leaf circle the pot like a tiny green ship and feel your shoulders uncoil. Of course, historians still argue whether this salted mainstay nourished as well as admirals insisted. Some point to the math: a pound of beef or pork, even after soaking, delivered solid protein and fat rebuilding muscles, frayed by hauling, reefing and pumping. Others counter that the sodium load strained bodies already thirsty, especially when water casks aged poorly and small beer turned shy. Did men drink more simply to chase the salt, and did that in turn skew the ledgers of daily liquid rations? There's also debate about the exact effect of long salting on certain vitamins and the bioavailability of iron. You listen to these scholarly gusts in your head, the way you listen to wind around the shrouds. Note the pitch, adjust your stance, keep moving. When your portion lands in your wooden bowl, steam wreathes your face salty and a little sweet, and your jaw relaxes as the fibres yield. You drag a piece through pea pudding, a thick, humble paste with ideas above its station, and together they become almost festive. Someone squeezes a discreet splash of vinegar over theirs, and the aroma lifts like a sail filling. A quiet laugh goes up when the cook announces a rare treat, a spoon of drippings to smear on biscuit. You spread it and the biscuit softens enough to behave, which feels like you've negotiated a small treaty between two stubborn empires. Another sensory turn, the ship pitches gently and the meat rides your spoon like a small boat glistening. Mess gear clinks a tiny rhythm against the bulkhead. Far forward, a line walks slowly across a pin, squeaking like a mouse practicing the violin. The sound blends with the soft burble of boiling, the faint bell of the half-hour, and the muffled hail of a gull who believes strongly in your lunch. Everything on a ship has an opinion. You learn to hear them and nod. Let's talk technique without putting you to sleep too fast. Before cooking, the salt meat is freshened in cold water, sometimes a quick dunk, sometimes an overnight soak because no one wants to eat pure geology. The cook pricks deeper cuts with a skewer to let the brine escape, then simmers the lot slowly so fibres relax rather than seize. If carrots or onions exist this week, they ride along like friendly stowaways. In older accounts, you read of lobscouse, a stew that throws meat, biscuit and vegetables into a single pot and lets patience do the rest. There's also sea pie, a layered affair where pastry or biscuit softened into the idea of pastry cuddles, meat and gravy until hierarchy dissolves. You grin at the name. Nothing about it is pie as your grandmother defines pie, but it's generous in the middle of a moving world. A sideways fact you'll enjoy trotting out on land. Different navies favoured different cuts and different salts, and those choices left fingerprints on flavour. Some fleets leaned on brisket-like slabs, others used shoulder or butt. Pork swung from streaky to lean, depending on who did the buying. Coarse sea salt pulled moisture brutally. Refined mined salt worked more gently. Brine sometimes included saltpetre, which kept the meat pink and discouraged the grey. In a few mercantile fleets, a faint mahogany tint came from molasses added to the pickle sweetness smuggling itself into survival. You file the detail away like a spice in a pocket, a thing to pull out when a meal needs a story. Now here's a tidy debate tucked like a note in the margin. Was the infamous thirst of sailors really driven by the salt ration, or by climate labour, and the ordinary streak of human error in managing waterlogs often blame the meat? Surgeons pointed to heat exertion and boredom drinking as equal culprits. Meanwhile, victualling boards insisted their salinity targets were humane, and scientific words that cover a lot of ocean. You sip your allotted drink and decide the only honest conclusion is that everybody was a little bit right, which is also how most shipboard arguments end when the boatswain clears his throat. Between mouthfuls, the mess swaps folklore. One man swears that dropping a coin into the brine makes the meat tender. Another claims that if you count 9 bell strokes while the lid is on, the pork will come out cheerful. Someone else says the beef is friendlier on Wednesdays, which sounds like a theological position, until you notice Wednesday appears roughly in the middle of the week when morale needs a hat tip. You contribute nothing but a smile and the very practical observation that your portion is disappearing at a rate consistent with happiness. After dinner, the cook strains the pot liquor and keeps it for tomorrow's soup. He calls it the sea that stayed. He wipes his ladle with a flourish that suggests pride more than sanitation, and sets the lid with the finality of a book closing. You help roll the empty cask closer to the hatch for airing. It smells like stories smoke wood salt, a hint of pepper and the suspicion of bay. If someone bottled that aroma and sold it ashore, they'd call it cabin number 3 and insist it pairs well with leather boots and unresolved nostalgia. You breathe, and the evening air answers back cooler now. The brine smell replaced by tar and hemp, and the tiniest sweetness from somewhere you can't place. Maybe a crate of onions, maybe the memory of them. The bell speaks, the watch changes. Your stomach, newly cooperative, settles into a slow sway that matches the sea. You understand why men grow sentimental about food they complained about. It wasn't the cuisine, it was the calendar, It kept the fellowship, it fertilized the way a bowl of something hot could persuade a cold hour to be kind. Over the rail, the sky starts saying the word night in long blue syllables. A cooper strolls by, taps a stave, and listens as if the barrel might hum back. You watch, newly aware that everything stored aboard water, beer, wine, vinegar lives by the grace of circles of wood holding their temper. Tomorrow the steward will count again, the cook will soak again, the pot will sing again. And somewhere just ahead in a shadowed compartment, a forest of other casks waits, each with its own temperament and tale. You wipe your bowl, tuck your spoon, and look toward that darker cluster of barrels the way you'd look down a twilight street you haven't walked yet. The ship breathes, and you breathe with it, content and a little curious about what else these staves are hiding. What other liquids and pickles the voyage will ask you to trust. But the next duty was even stranger. You meet the barrels like you'd meet the ship's bones, by touch and by ear. You trail your fingers along staves that feel like river music frozen into wood. Then you knock lightly and listen for the answer. A good cask replies with a compact thrum, a sound like a fist closing around a secret. The cooper, broad as two doorways and twice as confident, watches you the way a librarian watches someone handling very old books. "Don't court them," he mutters, tapping a hoop with a wooden mallet. "Woo them." You nod as if this were normal dating advice. Out here, romance speaks oak and iron and the perfume of pitch. Mainstream fact first, nailed as true as a hoop around a stave barrels and brine, were the refrigerator, the pantry, the Tupperware of blue water empires from the late Middle Ages straight through the age of sail and into the steam century's habits. The cooper's craft shaping narrow staves of oak so they swelled tight with nothing but geometry, and soaked Will carried beef and pork fish and beer water and wine vinegar and pickles, tar and powder, and even the sour gurgle of kraut on certain enlightened ships. Brine salt dissolved until the liquid could bully bacteria into silence, sat heavy around meat, and sometimes fish. Vinegar kept onions, gherkins, and the occasional brave vegetable crisp enough to remember what they'd been ashore. Without these circles of wood and these jars of ocean in miniature, most voyages would have eaten themselves into mutiny. You lean close, and the sensory anchors change from rope and spray to carpentry and chemistry. The smell is maple syrup without sweetness, toasted oak a ghost of smoke resin, warm iron, and that tar-pitch note sailors carry in their hair the way bakers wear flour. Hoops sigh when they're tapped, bungs slide with a wet gasp, brine shivers like polished glass over meat. Somewhere aft the ship breathes, and the cargo answers in murmurs, dozens of wood-throated whispers saying "steady, steady," as the swell tilts the floor under your boots. The cooper shows you a stave, arched, beveled, proud of its curve. "We don't use glue," he says like a priest explaining a doctrine. "Only shape, only swelling, only faith in the wood." He names his trees the way some men name horses, Quercus robua if the ship took on casks in the Baltic, Quercus alba if a merchant yard packed them in Virginia, Limousin for certain wines, tight grain, open grain each with a temperament you're invited to respect. He speaks of toasting versus charring, of how a kiss of heat coaxes out lactones and tannins, more important to wine and spirits than to beef, but every barrel inherits its childhood. You nod like a polite tourist at a cathedral, and he grins because he knows you understood one true thing: this is architecture that holds soup. There's showmanship too. When a fresh set of staves goes into hoops like ribs in a corset, the cooper coaxes them into a circle with steam and patience. He drives the hoops home with a rhythm, tang, 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 until the cask tightens and the belly rounds like a promise. He wets the wood and it swells. He sets a crow's groove and beds a head. He burns a stencil, brands a date, and the thing suddenly has a name. The first time you watch him raise a barrel, you feel a little stupidly proud, as if you've learned a dance you didn't know your feet remembered. Quirky tidbit time, because the sea loves odd pockets of pleasure, sailors gave barrels personalities. Water casks earned nicknames: Old Reliable St. Joan, the Sulker, depending on whether they leaked or behaved. On certain slow afternoons, men rolled empty casks along the deck like fat dogs racing them for a wager in a game. The boatswain pretended to disapprove of until he picked a favourite and shouted himself hoarse. There were barrel songs too, drumbeats on the heads, while hands sang nonsense rhymes to keep time on pump duty. And in more than one ship's lore, a lucky barrelhead planed into a table served as the mess's altar for birthdays, lotteries, and the solemn distribution of plum duff. You crouch near a brine cask while the cook lifts the lid. The liquid is perfectly rude, dense cold salt enough to make your tongue remember every river you ever drank from. He skims a shimmer off the top with 2 fingers and tastes like a judge. Alive, he decides, meaning it will keep life in the meat without encouraging other, less invited life. Brine is democracy run by a tyrant, everything floats or sinks according to specific gravity, and microbes are outvoted by sodium and time. If a scum forms, he scrapes it. If the brine dulls, he stirs in fresh salt and mutters the little arithmetic of preservation, saturation temperature, headspace, the tight morality of a good seal. You feel faintly like you're in church. Fat plank number 2 bolted across the beams, not all barrels aboard were equal. Water casks were usually larger, lined with pitch or resin to keep funk at bay, set in the shadows to stay cool and rotated often physically, and on the ration list to prevent one cask from becoming the Dead Sea of the hold. Beer and wine barrels arrived with their own biographies. Beer casks vented occasionally to keep from going feisty. Wine casks sulked if stacked beside onions. Vinegar barrels were everyone's frenemy, excellent for pickling unwelcome if they perfumed the bread. Meat casks got priority space and steady inspection. Pickle casks nestled close to the galley, where a conspirator with a fork could be politely discouraged. You noticed the way the cooper checks hoops after a weather change, as if the ship herself had changed her mind and the barrels might follow. Iron expands and contracts. Wood swells and dries. Pitch softens and rehardens. Tiny gaps appear and vanish like daydreams. The cooper listens for leaks, no one else hears a sprinkle in the bilge here. A darkening stripe along a seam there, then wedges swells or rehoops, before loss turns into famine. You realise with a small shiver that most of your voyage hangs on one man's ear. Here's a tidy scholarly squall to keep you honest. Historians still argue whether water stored in pitch-lined oak truly went bad as quickly or as universally as sailors' jokes insist. Some claim the complaint was mostly about taste oak, pitch a shade of algae, and that a good cask kept water drinkable for months, especially in cool holds. Others point to surgeons' notes and court-martials where foul water precipitated crisis, insisting that microbial bloom bilge taint or poor cooperage doomed many a cask by week 6. Then there's the debate over brine strength. Some victualling manuals specify near saturation. Others recommend a stepped process. Dry salt first, brine later to avoid turning beef into salted stone. The truth as usual at sea wore the face of circumstance, port quality, tree species, climate skill, hurry. Another odd lovely tidbit slides over the rail in a few navies. Empty wine casks were shaved sweet inside and repurposed to carry water for officers, the ghosts of wine tannins politely improving the taste. Meanwhile, common sailors sometimes preferred small beer because it tasted alive, meaning the mild fermentation masked the cask's wooden memories. In Nordic and Baltic trades, crews learned to adore spruce beer and sour rye kvass, both herbal, both mildly tart, both friendlier than flat water, and more reliable than moody ale in heat. You file those flavours away in your mouth's library next to fresh apple and rope on a foggy morning. You help roll a cask along skids toward the hatch and feel the ship's geometry in your bones. Round things are easier to move, that's the genius. One man pries another guides, a third sings the beat, and the barrel glides like a well-fed seal into its new nook. The cooper chalks a mark on the head, and notes the move in a book whose handwriting looks like it was taught by a patient raven. You respect the ledger more than you expected. On this moving town, memory written down is a food group. The debate in your head turns to flavour. Did oak lend anything meaningful to brined meat the way it certainly does to wine? Most cooks, you ask, shrug. Salt rules this kingdom. Oak is just architecture. Still you catch a whisper of something when hot meat meets cool air, a faint vanilla tan in echo, that could be your imagination wearing a powdered wig. Either way, science does one of its tidy bows. Tannins are mildly antimicrobial. Toasted oak is less hospitable to moulds, and clean wooden surfaces kept dry between uses can be surprisingly hygienic. It isn't magic, it's maintenance, and maintenance is the closest thing a ship has to prayer. You think about failure because everyone on board does quietly, like counting your steps. A burst hoop, a stove-in head, a slow leak hidden in a shadow, a bung left loose by a tired hand. There's a story the men tell in a cheerful tone that fails to hide its teeth. A merchantman that sailed fat with provisions then lived too long in the doldrums. When wind returned, half her water tasted like a conversation between a swamp and a boot, and the crew had to trade biscuit for barrels in a port that smelled like oranges and diplomacy. You file the morale under keep the cooper friendly and the purser honest. Between chores, the cook opens a modest cask no taller than your knee pickles. The brine here is vinegar sour, perfumed with mustard seed and dill. He spears a wedge of something green that dreams of its former self and drops it into your palm with the ceremony of a knighthood. You bite. It bites back in a way that makes your jaw sing and your eyes water happily. The whole mess table sighs as if a little spring has gurgled up through the plank seams. For 3 minutes the ship is a garden of one sharp vegetable. You laugh quietly at how a pickle can feel like a parade. Joke quota fulfilled with affection, you ask the cooper if he ever made a barrel too tight. He says once. I put the ocean in it and forgot which one. You tell him it must have been the quiet ocean. He says, aye, until it remembered. Out here, humour lands like a small warm loaf, simple shared and precious. By late watch, the hold smells tempered and calm. Hoops no longer ping with heat. Staves feel cool and slightly damp. Somewhere a mouse reconsiders its life choices near the pickles. Topsides, a soft bell drifts and the air tastes of oak dust and salt. You realise you've spent the day among circles inside a world of circles, hoops round staves, barrels round brine ship round horizon, days round bells. Everything is being kept held, coaxed to last meat water beer hope. You climb the ladder palm sticky with a film of resin and respect. At the hatch you pause, nose lifted like a polite dog, and catch a faint unfamiliar tang. Not brine, not beer, not vinegar. It's water, but wrong sweetish breathless as if it forgot how to be a river. A sailor at your elbow grimaces, swirls his cup and lets a brownish thread run to the scuppers. Cask turned, he mutters, and half the watch groans in tired chorus. You look back into the dark where the cooper already moves, lantern poised like a tiny moon, and you know the next hours will taste of opinions, fixes, and a little emergency arithmetic. But the next duty was even stranger. You lift the cup and the ship lifts with it, so the first sip is a negotiation between gravity timbers and hope. The water looks clear enough in the lantern's cone, but your nose hesitates. There's that shy sweetness again, like a pond trying to pass for a spring. You let it touch your tongue, and the ocean's library opens to the wrong page, oak pitch. A mutter of algae and a whisper that says this water has been sitting too long thinking its own thoughts. You swallow, because thirst has its own chain of command, then blink back the aftertaste which lingers like a polite ghost. Wind threads the rigging with a thin whine. Somewhere aft a bell answers in warm bronze. Beneath your boots the hull's slow hush repeats itself. Wave, would wave, as if the sea were practicing breathing for both of you. Mainstream fact to plant your feet on long voyages before reliable desalination or modern filtration water aboard was stored in wooden casks lined with pitch or resin, filled from rivers, wells or town conduits at the last port, and rationed daily, often a gallon or so in theory, far less in practice, when casks ran foul or leaked and augmented or replaced by small beer or weak wine, because mild alcohol helped keep microbes shy and morale cooperative. Freshness evaporated fast. By week 2, many casks tasted of their childhood forests. By week 4, some brooded into funk. By week 6, the surgeon and the cooper were conjoined philosophers, debating whether taste meant danger or merely drama. You learn the ritual of airing water. The cooper and steward roll suspect casks into the light, crack the bung and let the liquid breathe while the ship does its own slow yoga in the swell. A rope mesh is rigged. Buckets are dipped. Clear streamers arc over the side like silver handwriting, and then something called faith takes over. A little breeze skims the surface. Some odours wander off. The men insist it tastes better because it looks like a river again. You sip, and you do in fact taste less boot and more cloud. Perhaps the improvement is 50% physics, 50% theatre, and 100% necessary. Your sensory anchors flicker and shift wet oak. Tar warmed by sun. The metallic clink of hoops, the sloshing syllables from inside the casks as they roll a soft gull-lup like the ship's second language. In the scuppers, small streams run companionable, and for a moment the deck seems like a tiny city with canals and bridges, and men moving the weather from one neighbourhood to another. Someone whistles. Someone else coughs a laugh. The breeze smells unaccountably of onions that no longer exist. Memory, you decide, is the strongest spice aboard. Now, a quirky tidbit the old hands share with a wink. Some crews, especially on northern runs, brewed spruce beer aboard to sweeten the water situation. They boiled spruce tips with molasses, or sugar-cooled the pot, pitched a little yeast if they had it, and by next day had a tart resin-kissed drink that tasted like a pine forest had taken up baking. It didn't last long, but it didn't need to. Thirst and novelty are efficient logistics officers. Elsewhere, Baltic crews leaned into kvass sour rye bread reborn as a gentle fizz, while in colonial ports barrels of small beer rolled aboard by the dozens, each one a travelling well with a sense of humour. You take a cup when it's past and feel your tongue sigh in relief. The joke about liquid bread finally makes friends with your mouth. Another practical trick shows up with absolutely no ceremony. The cook drops a clean canvas bag stuffed with charcoal into a scowling water cask. By next watch, the smell eases, and the taste recalibrates to distant river-friendly swamp. The charcoal, he mutters, eats bad thoughts. It also absorbs certain compounds which you file away because you enjoy knowing why your tongue becomes less sad. If citrus peel exists this week, slivers go into perfume patrolling the headspace. Vinegar diluted is sometimes swirled around a cask and poured off before refilling. Oak shavings toasted in a pan can be tied in a pouch and dunked like a tea bag to coax out friendlier tannins. The ship is a laboratory staffed by tired optimists. Time for a clean plank of fact rationing was literal. The steward measured with a dipper, the cooper tallied the casks, the purser made the ledger behave, and the boatswain enforced the line. Men queued with beakers, flasks, tea and mugs. The bell marked the distribution. And any man caught freelancing with a gimlet and an unguarded bung found himself acquainted with penalties that tasted worse than stale water. On hotter voyages, the allowance sometimes split half in morning, half in afternoon, so work never fell entirely into thirst. On better voyages, water casks were rotated, frequently inspected, re-hooped if they sulked and tucked away from heat. On worse voyages, the hold became a sauna, and water learned to imitate soup. Scholarly squall blowing in steady historians still argue whether sailors truly drank more beer and wine than water, or whether the jokes simply aged better than the truth. Some victualling tables specify daily beer by the quart, especially in northern navies where grain and hops were plentiful. Others show water as the backbone with beer, an early voyage luxury that dwindled. Surgeons' journals describe outbreaks of illness blamed on foul water, yet also praise careful cooperage that kept supplies wholesome for months. Then there's the layer of chemistry we name comfortably now mild alcohol, and lowered pH inhibit bacterial growth but not perfectly. Aeration brightens odour but doesn't resurrect purity. Charcoal helps but behaves slowly. Was foul water a universal plague or a solvable management problem? The answer, like the horizon, keeps moving with the ship. You think of desserts because the sea is one made of the wrong drink. Your lips dry during midwatch not from heat but from salt air that sips at you all night. You dream of wells and pump handles and the sound a wooden bucket makes when it kisses a clean stone throat. Then morning breaks with a laugh, clouds a soft drizzle the deck slick as a new coin. The carpenter and half a dozen hopeful souls spread clean sails in shallow troughs and sieve rain into casks. A tin cup becomes a cathedral chalice as each man gets a swallow of sky. The taste is so pure it aches. For 3 blissful minutes everyone is a poet of precipitation. A joke gets its turn gentle and necessary. You ask the cooper whether the water is truly turning deadly or merely turning opinionated. He squints at a bung and says, "It's only deadly if it learns to swim the wrong way." You nod solemnly and declare you will drink yours while it points in the same direction you are. 2 men over here, and the line adopts your policy with straight faces for the rest of the day. On a ship, humour is a rope thin strung past hand to hand across a gap. Technique returns quiet as a cat. The steward marks casks with chalk. W for water, B for beer, V for vinegar, and little dots that mean open sound or suspect. He notes which were filled in river, which from town conduit, which shared cartage with onions never again, which came from a cooperage with a reputation for tight grain and tighter ethics. A suspicious cask is emptied enough to be manageable, rolled rinsed with vinegar water aired and resealed with a fresh plug of oak. If the ship makes port, the water party becomes a ground invasion, clean rinses, fresh fills, gaskets, re-soaked hoops, set heads inspected, and a silent prayer to the municipal supply. Another quirky fragment drifts down from the quarterdeck. Officers often had their own small casks or ceramic jars in their cabins, private wells within the public desert. Some were honest emergency stores, others were preference water, which is to say the liquid tasted like an argument sailors were not invited to have. Rumours like bilge find their way into every seam. On a generous day, a lieutenant sends a jug forward to a feverish man. On a less generous day, the forward mess composes sonnets about justice and drinks another cup of spruce beer. The debate in your head widens to include disease because it always does. Was the dysentery that stalked some voyages a gift from foul water, from bad food, from close quarters, or from all three writing a chorus with unwashed hands? The surgeon's remedies, vinegar gargles, diluted spirits, mustard plasters sound like home remedies, because they were, and sometimes they worked by accident where intent failed. You decide not to solve the 18th century tonight. You decide to sip, swallow, and keep your cup clean, which is the kind of wisdom that always survives peer review. By second dog watch, the repaired casks have quieted down. Bungs sit snug like buttons on a winter coat. The air by the hatch smells less ironic. You take a fresh dip, let it rest in your cup a breath, and drink. It's better, no orchestra of swamp, only a baritone of oak and a faint echo of pitch. You imagine your insides nodding in thanks, and you promise to bring a lemon the size of a cannonball if you ever run into a time machine. Wind strengthens, and the rigging sings in 3 thin notes that weave around the bell like friendly snakes. Your tongue reconciled lets bread taste friendlier, and even the pea soup seems to remember childhood. You start to understand why logs praise sweet water like a miracle and curse ill water like a mutiny. The difference between a decent day and a dangerous one might be a cask that behaved. Night climbs aboard with soft feet. Lanterns hatch golden ovals on wet planks. The sea breathes in the dark like a big thoughtful animal. The cooper stores his tools, palms smelling of oak and arithmetic. The steward counts by touch, more than sight, his lips moving with the numbers of thirst and relief. You set your cup on a beam watch. It not move that perfect stillness that means the ship and the ocean are momentarily in agreement, and you let your jaw unclench with the lesson of the day. Even water needs husbandry when it becomes cargo. You're almost drowsing when the boatswain's shadow fills the hatch, and his voice arrives in a tone it saves for unpleasant but necessary. The beer cask, due for tomorrow's ration, has started to hiss and bulge in the warmth, and someone needs to tend the lively barrel before dawn brings both thirst and foam to the same roll call. You collect your cup, square your shoulders, and follow the lantern glow toward that corner where prudence, yeast, and luck are about to argue in public. But the next duty was even stranger. You arrive at the corner where prudence, yeast, and luck are arguing in whispers. The beer cask bulges like a proud belly. Froth beads the bung like pearls rehearing their entrance. Someone has laced a cloth over the vent and tied it with twine. The cloth lifts and falls as if the barrel were practicing breathing exercises. The cooper strokes the hoop with 2 fingers and murmurs, "Steady, my lively friend." You, for your part, cradle your cup with the sort of respect you normally reserve for small nervous animals. The air smells warm and bready like a bakery took a summer job in a boathouse, and somewhere in that fragrance there's a sly whisper of apples, pepper and old wood. The ship hums underfoot. The rigging keeps time. The lantern draws a fine gold oval on the head of the cask where a few ambitious bubbles pop with polite applause. Mainstream fact first, the kind you can pour without spilling in the long centuries before reliable fresh water, and long after sailors drank small beer ale, cider or wine, as routine daily rations, not purely for merriment, but because these drinks kept better than untreated water. Northern fleets leaned on beer and ale, Mediterranean crews leaned on wine, colonials and coasters liked cider when orchards were near. Typical rations once ran astonishingly generous on paper quarts of small beer per man per day, later shrinking to more modest measures, and in some navies giving way to spirits cut with water. Your ship falls somewhere in that timeline where beer is comfort and problem friend and fragile. The cask sighs again, and the cooper loosens the stop just a hair. A soft hiss escapes, fragrant and a little mischievous. He calls it lulling the barrel, which you file under phrases that make your day better. He shows you the quick arithmetic of venting too tight and the cask swells, staves strain, and someone learns new swear words. Too loose and the drink goes flat or turns moody. Yeast is after all a crewman with opinions. You take a small sample into your cup and watch the head lay down like a sleepy dog. The first sip is friendly, grain-sweet and low in strength, more bread than brawl. It washes away the memory of swampy water like a fresh breeze through a quiet quarrel. For the moment, you and the universe are on speaking terms. Your sensory anchors shift with the drink, tiny prickles on the tongue. A hollow knock when someone raps the cask, soft clinks of tin on wood, and the far-off metronome of waves pecking the hull. The galley smells of yeast and singed drippings. The ladder rungs under your palm feel dusty with flower memories. A moth tantrums in the lantern cone and then loses the argument. The foam on your lip tastes faintly of clove, as if the barley had been reading old spice ledgers. Now for a quirky tidbit to slip into your pocket like a cork accidental vinegar happens often. Wine that ships too warm or too airy may wake with opinions by week 3, and beer coaxed across the equator sometimes decides that living fast and dying tart is its destiny. When that happens, sailors don't weep, they pivot. Sour beer becomes bread batter or flip beer warmed and dosed with molasses, and sometimes a poker-hot iron for drama. Soured wine is enlisted for sauces, pickling, cleaning, and the sacred art of disguising yesterday's pork as today's culinary choice. On the best luckiest voyages, the ship's vinegar stays official, coopering tight acidity, high useful in the galley and the sick bay. On others, the vinegar arrives by surprise and is christened with a shrug. You hear the old hands trade recipes like contraband. Spruce Beer One declares tapping his temple keeps a man cheerful, and the water honest. Another swears that a pinch of toasted coriander makes indifferent ale behave like a gentleman. The cook not to be outperformed invokes flip a ladle of beer, a thread of rum, a spoon of molasses, all warmed with an iron the colour of comets, ending in a hiss that could make a bishop grin. You take a careful mouthful from his ladle, and agree mutely that weather improves indoors sometimes. Set another plank of fact across the beams in some navy's beer rationing dwindled as voyages lengthened into hotter seas, and spirits took the stage rum in particular cut with water, to make grog a habit formalised by an admiral with a fondness for practical solutions and sturdy nicknames. Wine persisted where wine was cheap and nearby. Cider kept hands happy through autumn runs. The logic was always preservation first palate after discipline threaded through both. Drink kept morale buoyant, but officers kept a hand on the tap because the line between daily tonic and deckside opera is thinner than a hoop after a hard sun. Cue the scholarly squall because the sea likes a debate with its supper historians still argue whether the famous alcohol rations actually improved health or merely improved mood. One camp notes that low-alcohol drinks carried fewer pathogens than stale water and contributed calories to men burning them at barbaric rates. Another points out that even small amounts spread across long days and hotter latitudes risked dehydration, impaired judgment aloft, and a culture that papered over water management failures with buzz. Some insist the shift from beer to spirits was economics. More than medicine, spirits are compact, stable, and profitable. Beer is bulky, perishable, and inclined to sulk in heat. Your ears like the shrouds hum with the debate. You drink your modest ration and elect to remain Switzerland with a tin cup. You play witness to the small homely technologies that keep the barrel civilized. The vent cloth gets rinsed in vinegar. The bung gets swapped for one that seats sweeter. A circle of beeswax seals a microleak. A damp canvas shade is rigged to keep the cask out of direct sun. And someone has chalked a smiley face on the head, which surprisingly seems to help morale and yeast in equal measure. When the ship heels, men wedge the cask with love and curses so the belly doesn't shoulder a seam. Every lad who draws a quart wipes the lip afterward, and the boatswain's quiet eye enforces the wipe without words. Cleanliness aboard is never ceremonial, its survival disguised as manners. Gossip eddies naturally to the scuttlebutt, the water cask where men queue, and in queuing tell the news. You note with satisfaction that the word itself will outlive the barrel. Language like yeast finds a way. The talk tonight is small and good, a letter saved for weeks, a gull that stole a biscuit with the confidence of a tax collector, a joke so bad the steward awarded an extra mouthful as punishment or prize. It isn't clear which. You contribute a story about the beer behaving like a cat independent, affectionate on its own schedule, and the line promotes you to deputy metaphor officer until further notice. Another quirky glint for your trove, some captains kept wine for sacrament ceremony, and the rare diplomatic picnic. Some surgeons dosed patients with posset hot milk, curdled with sack or ale for sleep or shock. Some cooks steeped cheese rinds in wine to make a flotilla flavour on grey days. You taste a bit of the last trick, the cheese seems taller somehow, and you decide there's a graduate degree to be earned in making small foods bigger. The ship's music changes as night slips its shawl over the yardarms. Instead of gulls and hammers, you hear the shy fizz of ferment, the woolly hush of canvas, the little clatter of mugs finding hooks. A bell marks the half hour with a bronze yawn. In the break between strikes, you can almost hear yeast thinking, breathe in, breathe out, make food, make bubbles, be useful. You smile at the notion that the crew is partly human, partly microbe, and entirely at the mercy of time. Now the joke quoter, soft and kind, you thank the cooper for saving the cask from dramatic decisions, and ask what he'd do if the beer attempted piracy. He says, board it with toast. You swear loyalty to the plan and volunteer to bring the toast. Humour on night watch is a hammock. Everyone takes a turn in it. You take one more measured cup because measured is the adjective that keeps masts vertical and tempers tidy. The beer's warmth sits low in your ribs like a lantern no one can see, and suddenly the wind's teeth feel rounder. Your mind drifts to economics, how a ship sailing out of a beer country seems to carry a piece of its homeland in every ration. How wine remembers hills, languages, and prayers. How a cider barrel can smell like orchards talking about school. Trade routes grow out of flavours as much as metals. You can taste an empire if someone pours it slow. Above a lookout coughs twice, and then after an etiquette pause sneezes into the universe. Below the cook grumbles at a pan that misbehaved and forgives it. You stand, stretch, and feel the cask's faint warmth against your calf, where you've been leaning the barrel and you sharing animal heat. The cloth over the vent rises and falls like a lullaby practicing its vowels. There's a thump near the galley, then a chorus of appreciative murmurs that sound suspiciously like hunger remembering its manners. A wheel of something rolls along the bench and comes to rest against a bucket with an amiable clonk. In the lantern glow, the rind looks like moonlight turned into luggage. The smell that follows is nutty buttery, a little barnyard, and a lot of hope. The steward dusts his hands and says with the satisfied gravity of a man finishing a sermon, "Tomorrow, gentlemen, we dress our biscuit." You swallow in anticipatory politeness because manners are free and cheese is not. But the next duty was even stranger. You watch the wheel make its dignified entrance like a small planet changing owners. It rolls along the bench with that self-confident thunk, thunk, thunk of a thing that knows its value, then settles against a bucket and gives off a smell that's half pasture, half polite barn, and 100% truce between hunger and hope. The steward dusts flour from his palms as if he were blessing the rind. The cook produces a wire like a jeweller about to cut a sapphire, and you, with your very best manners, hold your breath so your stomach doesn't speak out of turn. The ship sways. The lantern pulls honey over the rind. Somewhere a block squeaks once and then thinks better of it. In a world of barrels and brine, a wheel of cheese feels like a talking point that doesn't require an argument. Mainstream fact to set your footing ships provisioning out of Europe, Dutch, English, Portuguese, Spanish, French, often carried hard or semi-hard cheeses precisely because they travelled well. Dutch Edam and Gouda, with their firm paste and resilient rinds, became naval celebrities. English Cheddar and Cheshire, salted, stout and steady, rode many a hold. Italians prized Parmesan's cousins too for its age-defying dignity. Even modest local farm cheeses joined early legs of Voyages rationed before they turned shy. The Royal Navy at different times issued cheese on certain days ounces rather than pounds, meant to supplement not headline a meal. The logic was calculus you can feel in your jaw, dense protein and fat compact shelf-stable, if kept cool and dry, all in a package round enough to move by rolling when your hands were already full of ship. Your sensory anchors pivot from oak and yeast to dairy and steel. The wire cuts with a whispered zing. The rind yields like old leather that fondly remembers its first saddle. The paste inside winks creamy or pale straw depending on the wheel's biography. A curl of aroma rises nutty buttery faintly sharp the way a good argument is sharp, and your mouth does that honest sailor thing where it fills without asking permission. Knives click against wooden trenchers. Someone coughs for effect and claims they smell alpine sunrise, which is rich coming from a man who has slept beside the bilge for 3 weeks. The cook explains what the rind tells him, which is more than you expect from quiet skin. A waxed rind bright tidy belongs to cheeses sent out dressed against weather, and thieves' rats mostly, but also men with bad ideas. A natural rind oiled or brushed tells a longer pastoral story, one of cave or loft and patient turning. Salt crystals glitter like tiny stars in the cut of a well-aged curd. A faint squeak under your teeth suggests youthful enthusiasm. He slices a generous wedge and lays it on biscuit like a diplomat placing a treaty on a table. You bite, and for a brief upright moment the ship becomes a dairy with ambition. Quirky tidbit to tuck behind your ear, sailors gave cheese heroic duties on holidays. A wheel would be paraded like a prize on crossing the line ceremonies. On a saint's day, some watches got toasted cheese, a pan-sizzled layer melted into submission with pepper, and a whisper of ale served over biscuit that had agreed not to behave like masonry for once. There were games, too, cheese skittles with empty cask hoops, friendly bets on whose wedge held the oldest crunches those lovable salt crystals. Even the odd tall tale about a cheese so firm the gunner borrowed it to prop a cannon truck, entirely untrue but pleasurable to imagine. You add a very quiet joke to the pile, this wheel is aged enough to vote. Another plank of fact, because cheese likes company storage aboard, demanded choreography. Wheels lived slung in net hammocks from beams where air moved and rats negotiated a longer commute. Smaller cheeses nested in clean cloths inside cupboards that smelled like herbs and secrets. Rinds were rubbed with oil or scraped when they went opinionated. The steward turned the wheels every few days so gravity didn't write permanent letters in the paste. When the ship headed for heat, the cook shaded the dairy corner with dampened canvas to make a poor man's cellar. You help twist a hammock line and feel the wheel settle like a sleepy cat. Of course, historians still argue whether cheese notably improved health at sea or merely improved morale. One camp points out the calories dense portable, and the protein and fat that kept muscles and minds in the same conversation during hard labour. They'll add that calcium and a pinch of vitamins ride along. The other camp notes with pursed lips that cheese doesn't bring vitamin C to the party, and therefore cannot by itself pull a crew back from scurvy's cliff. They caution too that poorly kept cheese can bloom the wrong kind of life in tropical holds. Then there's the refined debate over moulds, and safety is the blue veining you discover a friend, a harmless cousin from a warm journey, or a guest who should be shown the rail context and nose ruled more often than microscopes. The surgeon sniffed. The cook squinted. The quarterdeck pretended not to notice unless someone turned green for the wrong reason. You collect another slice and admire the way it softens a biscuit's stubbornness. The Rin's chew asks for your attention without demanding your molars file a complaint. Someone sprinkles pepper like confetti. Someone else flush with charity drizzles a thimbleful of beer gravy. For a few minutes, hunger relaxes its shoulders and behaves like a civilized dinner companion. You realise you're smiling and try to look severe to keep up your sailorly reputation. It fails. Cheese is an outlaw that enforces its own amnesty. Technique slides, impractical and dear. The cook keeps a small board just for cheese, a mercy that keeps onion ghost from haunting dessert. He uses a bone-handled knife for thin work and the wire for broad strokes. The wedges get wrapped in cloth dampened with brine when the air turns brutal. Rin's that cracker mended with a smear of butter, because butter like poetry excels at filling small gaps. A muslin bag with toasted oats swings from a nail nearby, not a superstition, but a desiccant, he says, to coax humidity to the oats instead of the rind. You privately nominate him for an honorary degree in thermodynamics of appetite. Another quirky morsel officers in some fleets kept finer cheeses tucked into private pantries. Tiny wheels perfumed with herbs, crumbly lumps from a fashionable valley, which occasionally met the lower deck by way of charity celebration, or a canny captain who understood that random kindness buys silence better than orders. In Spanish and Portuguese ships, faintly smoky sheep's cheeses charmed the galley on feast days. On Dutch merchants, the red spheres of Edam became edible trade goods, their wax bright as flags. More than once, cheese settled a debt or sweetened a negotiation with a pilot who knew the reefs better than any chart. The scholarly squall gathers again, gentle but persistent, around the question of mouldy yet edible. Surgeons' notes and purser ledgers tell different stories. Some speak calmly of scraping surface growth and declaring the heart of the wheel sound. Others record condemnations with the gravity of caught whole lots flung overboard, while men watched like mourners at a riverside. Was that waste prudence or panic? Did crews accustomed to cellar cheeses ashore make fair judgments at sea? Modern scholars pass descriptions, white bloom, green webbing, black pinheads, trying to map them to microbes with names we now know. The past shrugs in good humour and hands you a slice that smells right. You notice how the wheel becomes conversation the way the scuttlebutt does. Men lean on elbows and remember orchards by way of cheesemongers. A Dutch hand compares tonight's wedge to one from Horn that tasted of bells and celery. A man from Devon swears his aunt's cheddar could cow a storm, whatever that means. An Italian cook's mate hums a tune that sounds like a hillside and grins at the parmesan crumbed over peas. You volunteer that this wheel tastes like a meadow, signed a treaty with patience, and no one laughs because it's true enough. Joke quota kept gentle, you ask the steward whether the wheel has a passport since it clearly passed more borders than your boots. He taps the rind and says, stamped on arrival, approved by every hungry man. You salute the wheel in mock ceremony. The wheel continues to be cheese undisturbed by bureaucracy. As the ration winds down, the cook saves reins like a banker saving coin. Soup gold, he says, and later you see why tomorrow's pot will surrender a deeper colour, and a smell like humble comfort learned a new chord. He grates trimmings into pea pudding with a conspiratorial wink. The pudding usually worthy, but grey becomes persuasive. You're not ashamed to admit that your spoon moves faster when the cheese has been whispering to it. Now your thoughts sail toward economy and empire because flavours invite maps. Edams stack neatly and signal Dutch routes. Cheddar's firmness remembers English dairies and the late summer labour of hands that also mended nets. Parmesan announces long roads from Parma to port mules and warehouses, and men who understood that patience can be cached later. A ship's pantry is a syllabus in geography. Tonight's lesson happens to be written in dairy. By last dog watch, the hammock of cheese swings slightly, now lighter, now happier. The lantern flame ticks. The line in the shrouds hums a single low note like a cello that fell in love with the weather. You dab your knife on a rag, smell your fingertips nut and straw, and store that scent away where gull cries and tar already live. If food is memory cheese is shorthand, one bite writes an afternoon in a meadow while you stand on a moving wooden street, far from any cow that ever chewed a thistle. You're sliding toward pleasant drowsy when a sack thumps against your boot. It's the pea bag, squat and serious, and the cook nudges it with his toe. Tomorrow, he says, we remember vegetables. There's a sheet of humour in the way he says vegetables as if peas were a philosophy rather than a plant. The old hand next to you pats the sack with a tenderness generally reserved for pets, and claims he can hear them dreaming of butter. You smile at the thought of dried peas with ambitions, then glance toward the pot where tomorrow's pudding will begin its slow, convincing work. But the next duty was even stranger. Morning finds you greeting a sack the way diplomats greet countries, with a cautious handshake and a silent prayer for mutual benefit. The pea bag sits squat and dignified on the bench, its canvas scuffed to the colour of weathered linen, its tied throat shaped like a small stubborn topknot. When you lift it, the weight is honest. When you loosen the twine, a greenish dust drifts up with the faint smell of hayloft and cold cellar. The first handful rattles into a wooden bowl with the dry music of the little stones, except they are not stones, although your jaw will ask for a recount later. You tip your palm and watch the peas tumble pale green and yellow like a tiny harvest, rolling across a table built out of distance. Mainstream fact first nailed down like a cleat-dried legumes peas, beans lentils with a heartbeat of shipboard vegetables from late medieval coasters to globe-trotting empires. They earned their passage with shelf-life compact calories and politeness under heat. Split peas needed less soaking, whole peas asked for patience and repaid it with moral fibre. Rations varied by navy and century, but Pea Day showed up so often that sailors built jokes, songs, and entire moods around it. Boiled into pea soup, mashed into pea pudding, or folded into burgoo, the little spheres turned water into meal and monotony, into something almost like ritual. Where fresh produce vanished in the first week, peas stayed stubborn, faithful, and constitutionally incapable of wilt. Your sensory anchors change key. Instead of brine's metallic sweetness or beer's bready sigh, you get the gentle thunk of a scoop against wood, the whisper scratch as the cook's palm trawls through the sack, the cool feel of the peas as they run over your skin like polite hail. Rain pocks the deck overhead in soft coins. Somewhere forward a line creaks once per wave like a thoughtful hinge. In the galley the iron pot breathes a damp warmth that fogs the edge of your vision, and when the lid lifts a gust of steam carries a scent that's simple green and a little nutty, the smell of a long-kept promise finally repaid. Technique arrives with a wooden ladle's authority. The cook pours the peas into a tub and drowns them in water that will later grow into soup. He swirls the water clouds, he pours it off, and the deck drinks greedily through the scuppers. He does it again and again until each swirl looks more like a mountain stream and less like a farmyard argument. A few pebbles impersonating peas click into his palm. He flicks them into a pocket like coins for a very small toll road. He pinches a pea, judges the hardness, and grunts a number that turns out to be the soak time, Split ones, he says, go quicker. Whole ones need a sermon. You get the feeling that aboard this ship the cook is one of the ordained. Quirky tidbit time, because peas collect oddities, the way Dex collects salt on some ships. Pea pudding was moulded into a stiff loaf and sliced like cake, then fried in the pan, slick with drippings from salt pork, essentially transforming thrift into indulgence with a single dramatic sizzle. In at least one log, a board hand reports pea balls which were mashed, rolled and baked against the galley's hot bricks, until they wore a crisp coat like tiny helmets. You imagine them marching across plates with surprising discipline, and there's a persistent lower deck theory that pea soup tastes better when stirred clockwise in the northern hemisphere and anti-clockwise below the equator. When you raise an eyebrow, the men answer solemnly Coriolis, as if the word itself were a seasoning. Fact plank number 2 slides into place with the clean sound of a plan working peas carried protein, and critically starch and fibre-slow fuel for slow grinding labour. They took well to companions' onions when they existed carrots, when the purser felt generous, a drift of pepper, a blip of mustard, and the democratic company of salt beef trimmings, or a bone that had one more story to tell. The broth thickened from translucence to persuasion, finally arriving at that familiar comforting opacity sailors call honest. Add biscuit crumb and suddenly spoons move faster, conversation deepens, and a watch that felt long sits down and behaves. The scholarly squall breezes in mild but insistent historians still argue whether legumes significantly blunted the worst of deficiency diseases, or whether they merely kept bellies content while vitamins quietly starved. Legumes bring some B vitamins and minerals to the party, but not vitamin C, the celebrity your gums beg for on voyages measured in moons. Some surgeons praised ships that issued peas more days than not. Others scolded captains who relied on them like a cure-all. Then there's the debate over flatulence. Yes, scholars have footnotes on wind aboard windy ships. Was it a nuisance, or as one cheerful diarist suggested, evidence of inward vigour? Your own verdict is pragmatic. Morale matters, steam matters, and a thick bowl beats a thin one when the wind goes sulky. The pot begins to talk in a voice that sounds like sleep discovering it can sing glup glup, the lid rattling a little. The wooden spoon knocking the rim in a rhythm too slow to be anything but comfort. The cook skims a pale foam and flicks it aside, then folds in a powder he keeps like treasure yellow as sand at noon. Peas flour, he explains, ground fine ashore and stowed dry. A fist of it tightens the texture the way a good speech tightens a crowd. In go onions rescued from the bottom of a net, diced with reverence. In goes a wisp from the pickle cask, a polite tang with better manners than vinegar. In go 2 whisper thin shavings of cheese rind saved from yesterday, and nicked back out before serving because thrift is theology in this galley. Joke quota present and accounted for, you ask a grey-bearded hand whether pea pudding is meant to be eaten or used as caulking. He sniffs tastes and says, both on alternate Thursdays. He grins and adds, good thing today is Thursday's cousin. You spoon up a mouthful and decide alternate Thursdays might be your favourite day of the week. The mess talk turns to colour as if the sea has left the men starved for anything, not blue-brown or rope-coloured. Someone claims Dutch peas keep their greenness longer. Someone else swears by a provincial bean that tastes like a conversation with an aunt who bakes. A young hand asks whether French ships eat lentils, and a man who once sailed in a privateer nods sagely. Tiny moons, he says, and you file the phrase for later use on land where people are susceptible to poetry. The cook, hearing this, produces a fistful of brown lentils from a jar and tosses a few into the pot like a magician proving a point about cosmology. More technique, because the ship respects manual wisdom as much as any latitude. If time allows, the cook brings the pot up to a gentle boil, then lulls it into a long, slow simmer lid, tilted just enough to let a line of steam write its diary into the air. Peas collapse at different speeds. He coaxes the shy ones with the back of the ladle, which he calls the persuader. When the texture is right soup, you can pour pudding. You can promise he salts like a man who knows this bowl will be the difference between a quarrel and a song. A ladle of the brine liquor from yesterday's beef tightens the flavour like a well-tuned drum. A scrape of nutmeg, if fortune favoured the purser, at the last market lifts the whole room a half-inch. You realise you're watching an art practised by men who would never call it that. Quirky historical morsel best chewed slowly, some ships kept pea vinegar. A brew of spent pea liquor soured deliberately, and saved in a small cask, then drizzled like a tonic over tomorrow's ration. There are also accounts of pea sausages, lengths of gut stuffed with seasoned mash, and hung near the galley to dry slightly before being browned in a pan for feast days. The idea sounds like a joke until you taste a slice smoky soft and persuasive enough to convert skeptics. Even the boatswain, whose eyebrows usually do all his talking, lets them relax. The scholars in your head resume their murmuring. Was the gas from legumes truly a logistical problem in crowded forecastles, or merely the butt of 1,000 predictable jokes? One surgeon notes fewer complaints of constipation when peas were frequent. Another grumbles about abdominal tumult on nights when the hammock swung too close for dignity. You shrug mentally because the sea has already taught you that every solution writes a footnote called "however." Peas solve hunger, complicate air, and give men a reason to invent better songs. By the time the bell marks, the watch bowls are lined up like little moons ready to be eclipsed by ladles. The cook insists the first spoonful rest a moment in each bowl. Let it introduce itself, and you swear the flavour settles by a whisper. You break a piece of biscuit into the bowl. It softens sighs and ceases its usual legal objections. The first bite is round, humble, and deeply polite to your nerves. The second bite suggests you will live. The third bite is memory in a green suit. Winter kitchens, stone floors, smoke that clings to wool. A hand scraping the bottom of a pot to make sure the best bits don't burn. You look up, and half the mess has the same far-away look. The ship steals that look away with a small lurch, and everyone returns to themselves. A modern aside drifts through your mind like a gull. If this were a midnight shift back home, fluorescent lights, humming vending machines, you'd call this a heavy split pea lunch special, and tip the cook with a smiley face on the receipt. Here, your tip is quiet dishes, and a deck left cleaner than you found it. The pay, of course, is that you're still on an ocean commute with no bus stops. The pot empties into satisfaction, and then into silence. The cook saves the last 2 ladles for tomorrow's start because starters live in soup pots, as well as sourdough crocks. He wipes the rim with a cloth long acquainted with service clamps the lid, and lets the iron tick itself cooler. You help rinse bowls in a bucket of hot water that hisses in the chill. The steam fogs your hair, which gives you the appearance of a reasonable cloud. Someone declares that pea day should happen daily. Someone else suggests that novelty is a spice all its own. You decide that gratitude is cheaper than pepper and twice as warming. The deck above drums with a sudden patter rain again, merciful clean. The carpenter spreads a length of sail in a shallow trough to catch what sky will share. You angle your cup to the edge and collect a mouthful of weather. The fresh water tastes like letters from home. You tip it into the last of your soup and witness an alchemy where the bowl brightens by a shade no chart yet describes. The watch changes. Footsteps arrange themselves in new patterns. Lanterns trade places with shadows. You put the pea sack back to bed, knot its throat and pat it once, as if it were a dog that finally learned the trick you most needed it to learn. In the lull, the ship's sounds grow large, cordage humming a low vowel, the bell practising its fractions, the sea rubbing its great hand along the hull, with a noise like a yawn held in. Your eyelids lower without consulting you, and you allow the pleasant gravity of food and work to lean you towards sleep. Just then the steward appears with a basket that smells faintly sweet and foreign. He sets it on the bench as if introducing a guest. The cloth lifts to reveal pale grains with a soft shine. Not peas this time, not beans, something that whispers of ports eastward and holds itself like disciplined snow. The cook meets your eye with a shrug that contains both secrecy and pride. If we're lucky, he says we'll stretch a sack across a week. You realise you're looking at Rice, the quiet aristocrat of shipboard starches, rare enough to be rumour and important enough to be plan. But the next duty was even stranger. You recognise the grains before the cook names them. You've seen them in market alleys where baskets look like moons and the air smells of steam and ginger. Rice sits there in the basket like quiet snow, with a plan, each kernel a small disciplined soldier waiting for orders. You pinch some between finger and thumb. They tick like tiny bones, dry and promising. The ship rolls and the grains shiver in a soft collective sigh that sounds to your hungry imagination exactly like relief rehearsing. The cook covers the basket again with the same respect he'd give a sleeping child, and you understand at once this isn't daily fare. This is a holiday that can be stretched across ordinary weeks if no one gets greedy. Mainstream fact first, steady, clean and satisfying as a well-washed pot rice at sea, was common in eastern fleets and trading houses. Chinese junks, Malay and Javanese vessels, Indian Ocean dhows, where it was staple and certainty. In European navies it was more a guest star than a lead. appearing on ration lists irregularly or in certain theatres, especially when ships provisioned in Asian or Atlantic colonial ports. The Portuguese Estado de India carried rice from Goa, and the Malabar, the Spanish Manila galleons, moved it from Luzon to Acapulco, and British East India men learned that sacks of rice were both cargo and insurance food that could be sold if the voyage behaved or eaten if it didn't. Parboiled rice steamed in its husk ashore, then dried, kept better and shed fewer nutrients to the pot. Plain polished rice stored neatly but flirted with trouble if made the centre of a diet. The cook taps the sack. Parboiled, if the saints are smiling. Your sensory anchors switch from legumes' earthy hum to the brighter, cleaner music of rice in water. The tub goes milky as the cook swirls the grains, then clears again as he pours. The sound is a hush-hush like a secret being washed before telling. He repeats the rinse until the water runs glassy, then lets the rice sit with a measured depth of fresh water, while the ship breathes in long syllables, hull wave, hull wave. A faint fragrance creeps up, something like warm rope struck by sunlight, something like the ghost of grass. The lid clicks shut. The pot becomes a patient animal. When it finally whispers to a simmer, steam rises in a thin ribbon that smells of comfort without boasting. Technique arrives with quiet precision. The cook measures by knuckle a bit of shipboard sorcery that never seems to fail water, a fingertip above the grain lid on fire low, no peeking. Let the rice keep its dignity, he says, as if dignity were a spice. After the simmer, he chokes the fire, wraps the pot with an old cloth and lets it rest the settle, a stage that transforms good into better. When he lifts the lid later, you watch the grains stand up separate and calm, like a crowd that has agreed not to argue. He fluffs with a fork he keeps for exactly this purpose, and the smell that escapes is so gentle, you almost miss it a polite invitation to stop clenching your jaw. Now for a quirky tidbit to keep in your pocket with your lucky nail congee juk. Kanji arroz caldo was the sailor's hospital breakfast and lullaby from China to Arabia to Iberia. Rice simmered far beyond tenderness, with water bones ginger, if you had it a splash of vinegar or the memory of one. For the sick, it slid down without argument. For the weary, it filled cracks no other food could reach. British messes that wintered in India adopted kedgeree, a cousin of khichdi. Rice and lentils smartened up with smoked fish and pepper when luck allowed, and somehow it followed the fleet back to cool home kitchens where breakfast pretended to be exotic. Portuguese hands bragged about arroz de bacalhau rice and salt cod behaving like best friends in a pan. Spanish cooks coaxed sofrito into arroz a bordo, a shipboard paella, on days when the sea forgave ambition. You taste a spoonful as the cook auditions a congee for tonight's watch, and you feel your shoulders loosen as if someone untied them. Second plank of fact set firm across your thoughts. Rice is logistics, genius, dense calories, quick cooking. When the stove is shy, versatile enough to court drippings, pickles, dried fish, or the rare onion-like partners in a dance. Properly dried and sacked above the bilge, it resists most of the ocean's mischief. Infested, it can be saved by heat parching in a dry pan to persuade weevils to leave, and by patience winnowing the living from the edible with a sailor's practice flick. In storm weather, when the galley grows moody, rice cooks faster than pea or bean. On calm days, it plays the long game in stews and puddings. The cook shows you sailor's duff, remix biscuit crumbs, rice a string of molasses, a handful of raisins hoarded by miracle steamed in a cloth like a small grateful planet. Scholarly squall on the horizon. Quiet, serious, and worth steering toward, historians still argue whether rice improved health at sea or offered a dangerous illusion of sufficiency. On one tack, rice supported labour with steady starch, soothed intestines, roughened by salt meat, and carried modest B vitamins when left nearer the bran, especially in parboiled form. On another tack, polished white rice, if relied on too exclusively in warm water trades, invited beriberi thiamine deficiency, whose weakness, numbness, and heart trouble crept like fog. For decades, surgeons mistook it for infection or miasma, until careful work in the late 19th century named the missing nutrient. Meanwhile, rice brought no vitamin C. It could not by itself keep scurvy off the gangway. Was rice a hero, a hazard, or a neutral ally that needed companions? The answer moves like wind settling finally on the practical rice is good at being rice. People are responsible for everything else. Joke quota gentle and on time, you ask the cook whether the rice requires a formal invitation to stand separate like that. He says I sent embossed cards to every grain, A few RSVP'd late but arrived well dressed. You swear you taste a tuxedo in your next bite. Humour like salt fits every pot. Your senses chart new territory. The sound of a wooden spatula scudding over pan. The small sticky shush as grains let go. The bright peppery whiff when he sprinkles a little cracked black onto a pan of fried rice made from yesterday's leftovers. The sulphur friendliness of a chopped hard-boiled egg rare as a comet folding into the mound like it belonged here all along. A tiny rasp of dried shrimp becomes perfume. A cube of salt pork diced to confetti becomes generosity. The men gather with bowls, ready eyes softer than usual. Rice does that turns a mess line into a family line for 5 minutes. Another odd useful morsel in tropical rain, some captain spread canvas, and scooped sky water onto a bed of rice in a trough, letting the grains drink and swell, then draining off the rest before cooking the rice. Remembers rain better than the cask does, an old master used to say. In very humid holds, stewards nested rice sacks within wicker to keep air slipping around them. For rats, tin guards on lines and a watch cat with a respectable resume helped, but cooks also smoked the storage space with a pan of smouldering herbs when they could bay citrus peel even coffee, if a sack had torn and destiny needed aroma. Back to fact with a chart and compass ration books from various fleets list rice as alternate or supplementary ounces rather than pounds, its presence spiky across months depending on ports of call. East India men show rice thick in their victualling when outward bound. Homeward that space turns into tea and spices with rice relegated to the cook's private arithmetic. Spanish and Portuguese logs in Pacific crossings mention rice more like a co-author. Atlantic slavers carried it both as cargo and as coffin insurance in the bleak calculus of their trade. Nothing aboard is neutral. Every grain is also a story about where the ship has been and what it has promised to bring back. Another pocket of debate because your mind has learned to enjoy them was parboiled rice. Truly the guardian angel its promoters claimed. Many modern scholars nod. Parboiling drives. Some nutrients inward. Hardens the grain's surface, discourages breakage and pests. A few contrarians argue that parboiling done carelessly ashore could encourage stale flavours at sea, or when combined with sloppy storage lull stewards into ignoring slow spoilage. As with barrels and brine skill and attention, make heroes out of ordinary materials. Rice behaves best when someone loves it daily, which is also true of rigging tempers and promises. You eat and time slows to the pace of chewing on deck at dusk. The bell speaks its fractions, the shrouds whisper 3 soft notes, a gull lays a lazy question mark across the sky, and then thinks better of asking. In your bowl, rice catches drippings from salt pork as if born for diplomacy. You splash a spoon of pickle liquor over one corner, and the bright vinegar wakes the grain like a polite alarm clock. A few peas join the party green confetti in a white festival. If sleep had a flavour, you think it might be this warm tidy and content to be exactly enough. A modern aside ambles through your head warehouse floors and buzzing forklifts, where cheap plastic tubs of take-out rice have consoled more graveyard shifts than the philosophers will ever count. Out here, the take-out box is a pot with a lid that squeaks. The counterman is a sailor with onions in his pocket. The fortune cookie reads, "Wind eases after midnight. Keep your knife sharp and your patience warmer." The cook covers what's left. The men are kinder when they know tomorrow has a head start. He tucks the rest into a lidded pan, slides it near but not on the warm brick, and straightens like a man who has just negotiated peace. You rinse your bowl. The water steams your face like a friendly cloud. Your fingers smell faintly of starch and pepper and tar. The ship squares herself to a new breeze. Somewhere a line snickers and then lies still. Your stomach, recently sceptical, signs a treaty with your mood. You're halfway to a very dignified yawn when the line at the rail shifts and a pair of hooks appear rope-braided and glinting. A hand passes you a coil and points toward the stern where the ship's shadow trails long and silver in the moon-pocked water. "Night's generous," the old hand says. "We pay our respects with a line." You taste salt on your lip and feel appetite change shape less kitchen. More hunt the kind of hunger that looks over the side and thinks in scales and flashes. If the sea is in the mood, tomorrow's rice may carry fresher company than salt pork has ever managed. But the next duty was even stranger. The hook glints like a question mark made of iron dangling from your palm with the promise of supper if the sea chooses to answer. You kneel at the rail where lantern light drapes in small trembling pools, and you tie the line with the kind of care you normally reserve for letters home. The ship moves beneath you like a patient animal. timbers humming canvas sighing, and out there in the black and silver water, something might be listening. A gull circles once and laughs as if betting against you. The old hand beside you dips his hook already baited with a scrap of pork fat saved from yesterday. Mutters a line that sounds like half prayer, half curse, and then pays it out into the dark. You copy him, and feel the cord pull gently from your fingers, disappearing into moonlight and possibility. Mainstream fact planted firm as a gaff in a deck plank. Sailors fished whenever patience weather, and the captain's indulgence permitted. Not every ship carried fishing gear, but most improvised it hooks, hammered from nails lines, spun from spare cordage bait, whatever the galley offered or the barrel forgot. In calmer seas, with time dragging the watch, might trail lines astern for mackerel bonito dolphin, not the mammal, but the colourful fish we now call mahi-mahi, or cod when near banks. Whales were far too large to trifle with, though logs record youthful idiots trying. The catch, if fortune smiled, relieved monotony, offered vitamins missing in cask-bound diets, and sometimes staved off the scurvy that crept like a tax collector across decks. Naval records show captains encouraging fishing in the doldrums when work was light and morale needed a leash. Merchantmen did it to save expense. Privateers did it because no port was guaranteed. The sensory anchors shift the quiet slap of the sea against the planks, the faint oily smell of bait mixing with tar, the feel of wet rope sliding past your skin, rough yet purposeful. Your ears tuned by hunger swear they can hear something stirring below scales, flicking tails, brushing tiny arguments between predators and prey. The lantern creaks on its hook, swinging splashing yellow circles that climb the sails and vanish into black sky. The old hand hums tunelessly a note for every finger's pull. Quirky tidbit to sprinkle like salt, some sailors named their hooks and swore by them. There are logs noting Old Faithful, a bent nail that delivered cod 3 times in a row. Silver Mary, a spoon-shaped lure cut from an officer's tableware. Widow's Hope, a hook tied to a prayer knot. In calm tropics, men lowered lines of patience. Hooks dressed with rag scraps bright enough to mimic squid dangled for hours while the ship dozed. And if nothing bit, some ships staged mock ceremonies where a sailor dressed in a borrowed gown of sailcloth was married to the sea. His dowry, a bucket of bait ceremoniously dumped overboard to persuade Neptune to return something edible. Sailors are professional comedians in disguise. Fact plank number 2, hammered steady fishing yielded more than calories. Fresh fish carried vitamin C in its flesh and liver, unknowingly helping prevent scurvy when citrus was absent. Captains who encouraged it sometimes saw healthier gums, fewer fevers, and improved tempers in their journals. The Royal Navy surgeons noted that dolphin mahi-mahi and bonito caught mid-ocean provided both refreshment and an antidote to monotony, with the bright firm flesh cooked in stews or roasted over quick deck fires. Even salted down for a day or two, fish gave crews a reprieve from the eternal salt beef sulk. Logs from East India men often mention turtle taken in warm waters, giant tragic bounty turned into soup and steaks. To sailors, the ocean was both highway and pantry, though one with a fickle landlord. The scholarly squall drifts over thoughtful historians still argue how often fishing truly supplemented diets, versus how often journals exaggerated the luck. Some point to long voyages where no catch is mentioned for weeks, suggesting hunger outpaced fortune. Others find consistent notations of fish stews, turtle feasts, and even shark meat when desperate. Was fishing survival strategy or bonus entertainment? Did crews exaggerate the memory of rare, fresh meals because the taste of variety burned brighter than daily biscuit? Modern nutritionists debate whether the vitamin content of occasional fish made a meaningful dent in deficiency diseases. The conclusion fishing was a safety valve, a hope machine, and sometimes a saviour but never a guarantee. The cook appears, arms folded, half amused, half sceptical. If you catch it, he says, I'll cook it, but don't bring me a mermaid. I'm not frying gossip. His apron smells of peas and smoke. His face is unconvinced, but kinder than his words. You nod solemnly, promising to avoid mythical creatures, though in your heart you know a little part of you would like to test the menu. The line in your hand jerks a quick, sharp electric twitch. You stiffen grip and feel something alive on the other end pulling back against your patience. The old hand beside you grins a gappy grin, whispering, "Don't fight the sea, lad, just dance with it." You let the line slip, then pull, then slip again, the rhythm more waltz than wrestling. Lantern light catches silver deep below, flashing once twice. The men nearby lean closer, bowls forgotten eyes bright with hunger's sudden curiosity. Quirky morsel worth chewing sharks caught in desperation were hauled aboard, beaten, butchered, and salted. Logs describe their flesh as coarse but filling. Flying fish sometimes threw themselves onto deck like small winged gifts. Men scooped them up laughing, fried them on the spot, and swore they tasted of the sky. In Arctic voyages, cod were plentiful enough to become reliable. In the tropics, catches were rare but dramatic, every fish a miniature holiday. There are tales, half believed, half dismissed, of sailors frying fish on iron cannon muzzles heated by the sun. Historians file that one under possible, but mostly a joke told over grog. The scholarly debate resumes: was turtle hunting a form of conservation disaster centuries before the word existed? Caribbean records suggest entire beaches of green turtles, harvested to stock ships, holds their living bodies stacked on their backs to keep fresh for weeks. To the sailors it was meat that breathed itself into storage. To us it looks like a prelude to decline. Historians argue about the tipping point: were sailors' appetites the culprit or colonial trade's larger machinery? The answer again is that survival rarely asks permission from ecology. Your line jerks again harder now. The old hand braces you with one paw of a hand and mutters encouragement that sounds like a curse dressed for church. You haul with care, knuckles, whitening arms straining. The silver shape resolves into a fish, broad and blue-green scales catching moon like polished armour. With a final heave it slaps onto the deck, thrashing, singing its own metallic drumbeat against the planks. Men cheer softly, too hungry to shout, too respectful of luck to boast. The cook nods once, already thinking of pans and spice boxes, and says, "Well, Neptune answered polite tonight. Joke quota fulfilled with grace, you announce that the fish practically volunteered for supper, saving everyone the trouble." Someone replies that if you wait long enough, maybe a roast chicken will fly aboard too. Laughter moves through the line like fresh breeze. The fish thrashes once more and is quiet. The cook takes it, cleans it with practiced speed, saves bones for broth fillers, for frying scraps for stew. The smell that rises is not brine or barrel, but life-clean, bright, immediate. Oil sputters, flesh tightens, and suddenly the galley smells like a kitchen that believes in tomorrow. Men lean close, bowls out, eyes wide. The first bite is soft, delicate, almost sweet. It tastes like forgiveness for all the biscuits' sins. Night deepens, wind softens, and the ship seems to approve. You lick your fingers, taste salt and fish and smoke, and wonder if the sea will be generous again tomorrow. Above stars burn like sparks shaken from a smith's hammer. Below your stomach settles into a rare contentment. You're halfway to sleep when the surgeon steps into lantern light holding a logbook, muttering about gums bruises and teeth loosening like bad knots. His eyes flick to the empty citrus locker with quiet reproach. The word scurvy hangs in the air like a slow, invisible storm cloud. But the next duty was even stranger. You hear the word before you feel the fear: scurvy. It moves through the night like a draught you can't find the source of, slipping under doors, nipping ankles, then climbing. The surgeon closes his logbook with a careful tap and asks you to open your mouth. You do, and the lantern paintbrushes your gums with yellow light. They feel sore, puffy, a little traitorous, like crew who've begun composing a mutiny note in neat, throbbing cursive. You run your tongue along your teeth and swear you feel them rocking gently in their berths, as if they've loosened the moorings and are considering shore leave. Above the wind threads the rigging with a soft fiddle note. Below the hull sighs. In the galley a last pan ticks as it cools, but even that homely sound can't drown this new cold arithmetic weeks at sea. Barrels, nearly honest bowls always full, but green has been a rumour for too long. Mainstream fact, first, clear as a bell over fog, scurvy is what happens when your body runs out of vitamin C, ascorbic acid, the thing your tissues require to weave collagen, that invisible net that holds skin to flesh, flesh to bone, blood inside its pipes and teeth in their tidy row. On long blue water voyages, before reliable provisioning and nutrition science, scurvy came like winter, slowly then all at once. Early signs are tender gums that bleed at a compliment, bruises that appear like gossip joints that ache like old doors, skin that purples and refuses to explain itself, wounds that sulk instead of knit exhaustion that feels heavier than your own body, and breath that grows a metallic halo. In worse cases, old scars reopen as if history itself were unwinding. Bones protest, hearts stumble, minds dim, and men who can reef in a gale struggle to climb a single ladder. The surgeon's kit smells of vinegar, spirits, and clean linen. He presses a thumb to your shin, and it leaves a soft dent that takes its time standing back up. He makes a noise like a disappointed schoolmaster and scribbles in his book, "Spongy gums, petechiae lassitude." He's seen it before. Every sea doctor has, from Portuguese caravels to Dutch Indiamen to British brigs run too lean in their greens. He prescribes what he can sour things, if any remain pickles, if the cask was honest onions, if the rats did not vote first a mess, ladle richer in drippings a stroll on deck when sun admits it's morning. He's not helpless, he's simply outgunned. Your sensory anchors switch to the infirmary's dialect spirits of wine pricking your nose tar and canvas, playing a duet with laundry soap, the faint iron ghost of blood from yesterday's lancet, the distant clank of the pump as the watch works the ship's lungs. The bell marks the half hour with a bronze crumbly sound that feels suddenly too heavy. Your mouth tastes like pennies and regret. You make a small joke. My teeth would like to tender their resignations in writing, and the surgeon loyal to morale as much as medicine awards you a thin smile and a thimble of something sharp. You sip. Vinegar burns like advice you needed last month. Quirky tidbit to soften the edges sailors swore by improbable cures when the world refused to offer probable ones. There's the onion and vinegar tonic a cook in Cork taught a mate who then taught a dozen ships. There's spruce beer, a tart resin-bright brew from boiled spruce tips and molasses, credited on northern runs with keeping faces pink and tempers fit for humanity. There's sauerkraut as 18th century Clark spelled it, barrels of shredded cabbage brined into cheerfulness. When captains issued it, weekly crews often walked straighter. Some men treasured dried rose hips or preserved tamarinds from a colonial port, little red and brown commas that could tack a sentence back into a body that had stopped reading. Others kept pocket peels of lemon like talismans, sniffing them when hunger felt too grey, promising themselves juice at the next port the way you promise yourself a day off you may not see. Another plank of fact set down with the surgeon's firmness. The cures that truly worked were fresh produce citrus first among equals, then raw greens, new potatoes, garden cress onions, anything with enough vitamin C to reset the body's broken loom. The problem was not ignorance alone, but logistics plus habit, plus the wide patient malice of time. In 1747, James Lind, a Scottish surgeon on HMS Salisbury, divided scurvy patients into pairs and fed each pair a different remedy. The two who received oranges and lemons recovered noticeably in a week, while those given vinegar, seawater, or elixirs of academic flavour did not. This tidy shipboard trial has become a lighthouse in the fog of guesswork. And yet, as you will learn, lighthouses need captains to believe them. Scholarly, squall-inbound, respectful but insistent historians still argue not whether citrus helps, but how quickly and consistently that knowledge turned into policy, and why it faltered when exported. Advocates point to late 18th century British practice under the influence of Surgeon Sir Gilbert Blaine and other persistent men issuing lemon juice, later lime juice regularly correlating with drops in scurvy cases, so sharp even the grumpiest purser could do the math. Skeptics with footnotes as sharp as knives note that adoption was uneven, that lime juice stored poorly if boiled and kept in metal bleeding away its virtue, that limes from the West Indies had less vitamin C than lemons from the Mediterranean, and that when the 19th century scaled the policy, clumsily scurvy crept back aboard ships that thought themselves cured. Was the citrus cure a triumph fumbled by procurement, a triumph adulterated by storage and supply chains, or a triumph that needed companions, sauerkraut, fresh meat, better water to lay the ghost for good? The debate has the pleasant smell of evidence and the unpleasant tang of bureaucracy. The crew responds to the problem the way crews do with chores disguised as hope. Men bring up sprouting trays, shallow boxes where damp sand and seeds will pretend to be a garden if the sea is kind for 10 days. Cress and mustard go in with the delicacy of baptisms. The surgeon labels them like he's naming stars. A boy minds the trays as if they were kittens. The cook guards a jar of pickled onions with a piety you previously associated with altar candles. A stoker produces a crust of tamarind block from his sea chest, as if sharing a family secret, and the surgeon measures out a little for the sick men, voice careful hands, gentler than you thought possible in someone who likes to argue with fire. You help rig a rain catcher when a soft line of cloud comes like an apology across the morning. Clean sail, stretched over clean tubs, the first plinks land like coins in a wooden bowl. The water tastes like the sky rinsed itself in your cup. With it, the cook mixes a thin barley water, squeezes the last ghost of a lemon you'd all forgotten into the pot, and the entire mess drinks like pilgrims at a spring. The effect is more spiritual than chemical, given the lemon's age, but spirits matter. The watch sings at their work with a notch more vigour, and even the gulls look less sarcastic. Joke quoter gently paid you tell the boatswain you'll secure your molars with a square knot until the lemon fleet arrives. He says make it a bowline. Quick to tie, won't slip easy to untie when you get your smile back. You promise to file Form 1A tooth lashing. Laughter is small, but it's real, and a real laugh is heavier than bad luck. The surgeon invites you to run your fingers over a scar on your forearm from a rope burn weeks back. You do, and the edges feel wrong. Not angry exactly, just reluctant, like a door that won't close flush. Collagen, he says, tapping the place with one clean nail. Rope of the body, needs its tar. He means vitamin C, but the ship gives metaphors for free and you hoard them like raisins. He shows you a page of the sick list, neat rows of names and symptoms that look cruelly like a muster roll of a crew. You don't want to meet the future version of your ship if no fruit comes aboard at the next port. Quirky morsel worth tucking away some captains fearing scurvy like fire maintained portable soup. A jelly made ashore by boiling down bones and meat into a glassy concentrated glue, then drying it into brown cakes. Dissolved in hot water, it made broth that chased chills and flattered biscuits, but it did little for scurvy. Yet in at least one journal, a captain credits portable soup with invigorating minds that earlier had sunk into despair. The body is not only chemistry. The part of you that hears bells and wind and finds them beautiful can for a while hold the line against the part that counts bruises. The scholarly debate circles once more over James Lind and what the Navy did with him. Was his experiment decisive, his book persuasive, his timing unlucky? Did bureaucrats prefer vinegar because it kept better even as it cured worse? Did the shift from lemon to lime, cheaper colonial less potent when mishandled, accidentally reopen the door to scurvy in a century that thought it had locked it? Papers stack. Admirals retire, pursers cut deals. Coopers line casks with good intentions. And somewhere on the Atlantic a man's gums bleed like a slow, red autograph. History like a ship turns slowly unless a squall insists. By dogwatch, the sprout trays already show a rumour of green. The boy in charge stands guard as seriously as a sentry shooing flies with the authority of a petty king. The surgeon allows himself a satisfied grunt. The cook peels an onion so thin you can see the candle through it and hands you a transparent crescent. It bites your tongue in a way that feels like waking up. Your body, practical as ever, sends up a flare of yes. You climb to the weather rail for a minute of quiet. The breeze has softened. The shrouds hum a single vowel. Distant phosphorescence scribbles kind words around the wake. You can smell the vinegar line outside the surgeon's door, the faint sweetness of barley water, the honest stink of men and work and hope. You catch yourself cataloguing citrus the way a miser inventories coin lemons thin-skinned and generous limes tart and argumentative oranges sunny and forgiving. You promise a grove a personal letter of thanks when you make landfall anywhere that grows trees. The bell touches the night with 4 and then 5 strokes time moving even while your collagen takes a holiday. The surgeon snaps his book shut with that same gentle tap and slides it onto a shelf that has seen more human stories than any library should. He looks toward the locked locker where once there were lemons and now there is air. He says almost to himself, "We know. We've known." His jaw tightens in that private way officers have when a problem is bigger than their hands. You're nearly asleep on your feet when a whisper of news comes down from the quarterdeck like wind that remembered your name. A sail-carved silhouette on the horizon, low and fat in the water. Merchantman eastbound rumoured fresh stores aboard. The captain means to speak her at dawn if weather holds and pride bends. The mess around you straightens the way dogs do at the pantry door. You taste phantom juice and dare yourself to be calm. But the next duty was even stranger. Dawn unfolds like a slow lemon over slate water, and you lean on the rail feeling your gums do their quiet thunder, thinking of fruit the way poets think of metaphors, hungry, hopeful, slightly ridiculous. The other ship slides closer on a mild wind, her hull writing dark cursive across the horizon. You practice your best polite face, the one you use for ration lines and admirals, and you let your mind rehearse juice peel pulp seeds, anything that might convince your body to stitch itself properly again. The bell tolls, the shrouds hum a gentle note, gulls etch parentheses around the meeting. If ever a day were built for bargaining, this one is. Mainstream fact first, neat as a slice. The citrus cure for scurvy is the closest thing the age of sail had to a miracle you can pour. In 1747, James Linn's small shipboard trial on HMS Salisbury fed pairs of scorbutic sailors different remedies. The pair given oranges and lemons perked up astonishingly within days. His 1753 treatise wrote it down in tidy prose that should have travelled faster than any ship. Over the next decades, voices like Gilbert Blaine's pushed the Admiralty toward regular citrus issues. By the 1790s, the Royal Navy was formally supplying lemon juice and later lime to crews often mixed with a little rum or water, an institutional habit that, when executed, well cut scurvy rates so sharply you could hear the silence in surgeons' logs. Meanwhile, mariners outside the British system used what they had fresh greens in lucky ports. Garden cress sprouted aboard sauerkraut, where German influence reached spruce beer and wort. In northern trades, tamarinds and mango pickles in the Indian Ocean. Even raw seal liver in polar voyages, ugly but effective. The best answer was anything fresh and often. Citrus simply wore the crown because it stored hope in barrels better than lettuce did. Your sensory anchors tuned to negotiation. The creak of boatfalls as a speaking boat goes over the side. The faint citric ghost in your imagination your nose is a liar but a helpful one. The polite thud of fenders as wood meets wood without quarrel. And the sing-song exchange of hails whence whither weather water. In the boat you feel the ocean's small fists under the planks. The other ship's cook leans over her entry port holding up a net bag of something round and sun-coloured. Even at this distance your mouth remembers how to make rain. You swallow so your voice won't plead. Quirky tidbit to chew while the boatswain argues prices early on. Some navies tried concentrated citrus syrups boiled hard for storage, a kitchen logic that unfortunately murdered the vitamin they wanted to save. Copper pans and iron casks added their own mischief metal ions, encouraging oxidation virtue evaporating quietly, while everyone congratulated themselves on neatness. A few surgeons swore by rob of lemon until their patients failed to thrive. Others noticed that fresh peels did more good than the most elegant bottle. On the other hand, raw sauerkraut barrels of cabbage singing in brine kept surprising numbers of men pink and lively, if the captain could make them eat it. One German wit supposedly told his sceptical crew, "Eat it on your bread and call it salad." By week 2, even the stubborn were converts. Fact plank number 2, steadied by a hand on the rail, Captain James Cook's scurvy luck owed less to a single magical food, and more to relentless housekeeping. He rationed sauerkraut and wort scrubbed his decks like a moral treatise, chased fresh produce in every cove and village, rotated stores, aired bedding, punished idleness, but rewarded cleanliness, and treated the men's mouths like part of the ship's rigging constant maintenance. He also respected variety celery leaves in New Zealand, wild greens in Tierra del Fuego, turtle meat in the tropics, any herb a local would sell for a nail or a smile. The result reads like wizardry in the journal's long legs with minimal scurvy. Admirers say citrus crowned the victory. Skeptics say logistics and hygiene wore the crown with citrus as princely advisor. You decide it's a good cabinet meeting. Everybody keeps their portfolio. The scholarly squall arrives civil, footnoted stubborn. Historians still argue who deserves the headline Lind for the trial, Blaine for the policy, Cook for the proof by persistence, or the unnamed shorewives and growers whose gardens actually made it possible. There's a bit of footnote too, somewhere along the 19th century, the British switch from Mediterranean lemons high in vitamin C to cheaper West Indian limes, plus the habit of boiling juice for storage kneecapped the cure. Cases crept back in polar voyages and merchant fleets, and puzzled surgeons blamed everything but the quiet chemistry mistake. Was it a procurement failure disguised as progress? An empire tripping over its own supply chain? A lesson that science without kitchen literacy limps? The debate is lively, and if you listen hard enough you can hear a lime clear its throat in embarrassment. You climb the ladder with the speaking bag while the boatswain counts coin and courtesy. The first lemon feels heavier than reason when it sits in your palm, a small sun-waxy dimpled extraordinary. The cook rolls it on the table with his open palm to wake the oils. The galley fills with a perfume that makes the whole ship stand up straighter. He halves it with a sailor's sudden gentleness, seeds glittering like tiny glass. The first squeeze hisses into a bucket of sweet rainwater. A thread of peel oils arcs like a golden silverfish. You dip a cup and the smell alone knits your mood. The sip is lightning married to balm. Every sore corner in your mouth says thank you in perfect chorus. Joke quoter, gentle and true, you announce that your teeth are rescinding their resignations and will continue employment with improved benefits. The cook, without looking up, says, "Tell them the union meetings on Thursday bring gums." The surgeon pretends not to smile and fails admirably. Another curious morsel from the ledger traders knew the value and priced accordingly. Anti-scorbutic fruit fetched sums that made pursers wince and captains posture. Some crews chipped in out of pocket a democracy of pain relief. Where lemons weren't available, ships bought oranges by the 100, or limes by the 1,000, or simply loaded onions until the deck smelled like a sweet argument. Portuguese ships out of Goa sold tamarind and mango achar to English captains, who didn't mind being saved by foreign wisdom. Dutch victuallers bragged of Zuur-cooled barrels stacked like cannon shot. In Manila, green markets did brisk business with sailors who suddenly discovered that salads were patriotic. Back to technique, because a ship survives on methods more than miracles, the steward marks a cask. Citrus never boil, stores juice in clean glass. Demijohn swaddled from light doses it daily with a measure of spirits, only big enough to discourage mischief, and keeps the issuing ladle free of yesterday. He squeezes fresh each morning if fruit holds, letting the men watch half ceremony, half compliance theatre. A wedge goes into congee, a drizzle onto pea soup, a splash marries with sugar and water into a lemonade that tastes like land smiling. Peels dry on a line, later slipped into puddings and teas, because the ship keeps every kindness until it is linen. Scholarly gust again, softer this time. Modern nutritionists point out that fresh meat, especially organ meat, carries enough vitamin C to matter, which is why polar crews eating seal liver sometimes baffled scurvy, while fleets in warm seas starved for greens and fruit but heavy on polished grains suffered oddly. Historians reopen cases from Arctic disasters and argue about whether citrus failed, logistics failed, or leaders failed to recognize fresh meat as medicine when it offended their idea of cuisine. Your private conclusion: the sea accepts no dogma, it pays in results. Your senses settle into a new pattern, the quick lemony sting in the air, the quiet joy as men lick sticky fingers with the solemnity of communion, the clink of clean cups, the faint peppery bite when someone grates a curl of dried peel over rice. The wind lifts its voice half a note brighter, or maybe that's just your blood agreeing to mend. Quirky footnote to tuck in your sea chest: some captains swore that issuing the juice, as grog's good cousin, improved compliance men who ignored medicine, rarely ignored the rumour of rum, so lime juice and water became a habit with a nickname. Shorewits laughed at limeys, but the sneer couldn't pierce the numbers. Meanwhile, a London entrepreneur bottled lime juice cordial for the Navy, and then for everyone. Sailors carried the taste ashore, and an empire of cocktails accidentally grew on the stump of a medical protocol. Your future bartender owes a debt to a surgeon's notebook and a ship's sick list. The debate in your head quiets, not because it's resolved, but because the lemon in your hand is eloquent. You go to the sprout trays and see green freckles pushing through sand like punctuation marks, insisting on optimism. The boy guarding them beams with a pride that could raise a mast. The surgeon pours exact rations, speaking each man's name like a toast. The men answer with that strange hush food can make among people who argue for a living. A modern aside wanders in on deck shoes back home on a fluorescent midnight. You tilt a plastic bottle into your water and call it vitamin boost, then yawn your way through spreadsheets. Here the boost has a peel and a price, and your spreadsheet is the horizon. You smile anyway, because a solved problem is a lullaby, whether sung by a lemon or a label. By late afternoon, the other ship dwindles to a polite memory, and your hold carries a dozen bags of arguments settled in your favour. The cook stores them like gold in hammocks slung high, cool and scandal-proof. The bell marks 8. The deck glows honey, and for the first evening in weeks, the mess sounds less like a clinic and more like a kitchen. You breathe without inventorying bruises. The ship's wooden heart slows to a comfortable thud. You're halfway to thinking you might be invincible, always a dangerous sport at sea, when the steward strolls by with a ledger and a sly cough. He taps tomorrow's page with one square finger. Feast day, he says. Galley request onion pea, a thread of lemon, and permission to attempt bread. You blink. Fresh bread aboard a moving house. The cook grins the grin of a man with secrets and sacks of dusty promises. He pats a jar that looks suspiciously alive bubble strolling up a tan slurry and says we'll coax the galley to breathe. But the next duty was even stranger. You step ashore as if the dock were a dream of steadiness the sea once had and forgot. The air tastes like smoke and sugar and hot iron. The market wakes in layers. Bell clang, mule, snort, vendor, cry. 1,000 negotiations braided together like rigging. Your feet relearn stone while your nose learns a new alphabet, cardamom spelling its green vowels, pepper writing commas that make you sneeze politely, cloves punctuating in little brown exclamation marks. The cook walks ahead with the greedy serenity of a man about to turn coin into morale. The steward walks beside him, ledger clenched like scripture. You trail with a basket and a face that says, yes, I am ready to be surprised by fruit. Mainstream fact planted like a bollard. Blue water voyages were stitched together by provisioning ports, Madeira and Tenerife for wine and fruit, Cape Verde and St. Jago for yams and goats, St. Helena for gardens cultivated expressly for passing ships, Rio and Bahia for farinha and beef, Table Bay for fresh meat and vegetables, Batavia for rice and spices, Canton and Macau for tea and citrus Calcutta, and Bombay for rice, ghee and pickles. Crews bought what geography grew, and empire extracted onions in ropes, oranges by the 100 yams like sleeping clubs, plantains by the mat coconuts, with their own canteens inside sugar loaves that looked like church ornaments, sacks of rice, parboiled gold against spoilage, and barrels of anti-scorbutics generically labelled but passionately desired. These stops weren't luxuries, they were the hinges on which survival swung. Your sensory anchors change swapping wave for cobble sandal dust on sun-warmed stone vendors' scales, clacking like castanets the thin buzz of flies around a fish stall, a splash of palm wine on your tongue that tastes like a summer laughing at rules. A boy cuts you a wedge of pineapple with a flourish. It smells like a bell ringing in fruit. You bite and your entire face forgives the last month. The cook buys a mountain of onions, then a modest hill of garlic, then a shy grove of limes. He haggles for ginger, as if arguing about the weather with an old friend. You carry the citrus like eggs, and try not to look like a man who would marry an orange. Quirky tidbit you pocket like a lucky coin in Asian ports. Common sailors learned to adore tamarind, a sticky brown tart delight that slid into water and made it taste like civilization. In Batavia, crews bought mango achar by the jar, pickled mango with mustard seeds popping like punctuation perfect for waking up rice, and the sleepy ends of salt pork. Dutch warehouses sold gin in square bottles that stacked like bricks. English captains bought portable soup cakes from London, then kissed the hands of Batavian women who sold them fresh greens anyway. In Rio, men fell for farofa toasted cassava meal because it made stews taste like they had opinions. In the Cape, biltong sun-dried beef rode aboard as insurance against the weeks when weather made the galley sulk. Another plank of fact hammered true some ports planted for ships on purpose. St. Helena, Ascension. Tristan lonely rocks turned into gardens with cabbage trees and watercress, tended by garrisons and goats, advertised in pilots as health stops. Cook's journals read like love letters to these gardens. Bligh's logs too, when not otherwise occupied with mutiny and breadfruit. The logic was simple. Arithmetic vitamin C grows in leaves and peels. If you can't carry it indefinitely, you stage it along your route like lanterns in fog. A ship that missed its lanterns learned the taste of iron in its gums. Scholarly squall, civil warm but insistent rolls through the alley with the spice carts. Historians still argue whether these exotics change sailor health by chemistry or by morale first. Citrus and greens plainly fed bodies, spices fed desire, coaxing men to eat what boredom might have refused. Did pepper and clove extend the usefulness of tired meat by masking fatigue, thus improving nutrition indirectly? Or did crews simply feel seen by flavour and therefore keep better hours and cleaner hammocks? One camp points to measurable drops in sick lists after rich provisioning. Another shrugs and says the data is tangled with weatherwork and a captain's housekeeping. Like most shipboard truths, cause and effect share a hammock. A man in a turban sells you dates that taste like caramel invented literacy. Another offers dried apricots bright as small sunsets. You imagine them rehydrated in grog dessert disguised as medicine. The cook buys a sack of chickpeas and winks. Tomorrow, he says, we pretend the Mediterranean stowed away. He snags a handful of cinnamon quills and anise arguing half in words, half in fingers. The steward counts slowly to 5 in his head, which is his way of agreeing. You learn a new doctrine: spices are cheaper than mutiny. Joke quota filed and stamped. You tell the steward that if you purchase any more onions, the ship will be legally a soup. He says without looking up, then we'll sail on low heat. You concede the point and volunteer to be the ladle. Back at the boats, your arms remember the weight of abundance. The coxswain stows baskets as if arranging a cathedral of hope. Heavy things, low, delicate things, high citrus away from onions, the old feud bottle swaddled in net and curses. The water around the oars fizzes green in the heat. A gull slips by at walking speed, judging everyone with professional dignity. When you hoist aboard, the deck smells like a spice merchant took up carpentry. Fact again, steady as a keel, not every exotic was a triumph. Breadfruit Bligh's pet project sailed beautifully, but at first tasted like an argument to men used to wheat. Some crews loved it, fried in fat. Others fed it to pigs and felt clever. Durian didn't sail because the ship staged a mutiny of noses. Jackfruit made friends when paired with salt pork. Sago became porridge on the long, slow legs near New Guinea. Tea bricks rode as cargo and ended as comfort on cold watches. Coffee beans snuck aboard with ambitious officers and turned into midnight competence wherever a small pan and a big idea met. The scholarly debate widens into Empire's map. Were these ports of plenty a benevolent web or a net? Some argue the provisioning gardens and spice trades were lifelines for sailors and laboratories for global taste. Others point to coercion and monoculture, to gardens built on unfree labour, to epidemics carried as easily as oranges. When you drink tamarind water in the shade and feel human again, both truths stand in the cup: the kindness of the market woman who sold it to you, and the machinery of trade that set the price of her day. Another tidbit crisp as pickled lime peel sailors developed private economies that made captains sigh and pursers swear. A man with a nimble tongue could trade rope scrapings for chilies, a spare awl for a bundle of herbs, a song for a wedge of cheese. Smugglers drifted the margin, spice tucked under citrus tobacco, hidden in onions, a flask of arrack pretending to be vinegar. The cook looked the other way so long as the bargains came back to the pot. Your messmate returns with a paper twist of something red. Paprika, he says like a password. The cook sniffs and grins. Now our peas will speak Spanish. Your sensory anchors tilt back towards shipboard as crates thump into place, the drop of a lime into the citrus hammock thup. The soft crackle of onion skins, the whisper of rice sliding in its sack, the shy clink of glass, the faint floral hiss when a crushed clove steps into hot fat. The galley feels like a theatre at half-past curtain heat, rising players costumed in steam props arranged by the laws of appetite. A modern aside appears with sneakers and a shopping cart. You think of fluorescent aisles and price scanners of shelf-stable things with cheerful fonts that promise vitamins by committee. Here labels are leaves and peels. Supply chain is a woman squinting at the sun and telling you which stall has honest ginger. You pay in coin and gratitude and the sudden embarrassment of recognizing you have been eating like a winter for weeks. The cook sets triage greens and fruit for today, and tomorrow onions and garlic for a week, yams and plantains for longer rice for a month, spices until language invents new words for joy. He squeezes limes into water, grates ginger into a pot, tucks a ribbon of dried orange peel into pea soup with a look that says trust me. He cubes a yam, steams it, smashes it with a whisper of cinnamon and a braver whisper of pork fat. Your spoon forgets the word monotony. Joke too gently, you tell the cook the pea soup now speaks 3 languages. He says good. Tell it to apologize to your gums in all of them. Night leans against the mast and listens while you eat. The deck glows. The air tastes like a crossroads. The tang of citrus, the sweetness of yam, the coast winds clean. The steward relaxes enough to let his ledger sit shut for a watch. Men talk softer the way people do when they're busy being content. You stack bowls and feel oddly taller. One more argument in the scholarly pub before last call: how much of this port-bought variety truly rode out into blue water before spoiling. Some historians show brisk turnover gardens eaten within a week, then casks again. Others cite clever pickles and sun-dried tricks that stretched flavour across latitudes. The answer leans on climate distance and habit. Those who planned their fresh days like holy days kept their crews pink and their tempers tame. Those who trusted to luck wrote worse diaries. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand and your skin doesn't bruise at the thought, which feels like witchcraft, until you remember lemons have names now in the log. The last crate settles. The quarterdeck lights dim. You breathe and the breath doesn't taste like old wood. In the galley, the cook tests a pan with a miserable onion slice and a heroic spoon of fat. The pan snarls, the onion sings, the smell is a hymn to everything that isn't boiled. He lifts the pan, and the flame reaches too high, kisses the lip, and then thinks about kissing the sail hanging to dry. He swears like a poet, claps on the lid, and grins at you with a challenge that smells like caramelizing possibility. "All right," he says, "let's cook while the floor moves." But the next duty was even stranger. The cook's jar sits on the bench like a living pet, beige slurry bubbles rising lazily, the faintest sour-sweet perfume that makes your nose wrinkle, and your stomach lean closer. He pulls the cloth back with ceremony, stirs once with a wooden spoon, and you hear the faint fizz like the sound of rice whispering secrets to water. "Starter," he says, voice low like he's naming a saint. Around you men lean closer. The promise of bread aboard ship has the gravity of miracle. Your gums ache for citrus still, but your tongue dreams of crust and crumb. Outside, the gulls scribble loops in the sky, mocking sailors who forgot that land does things like rise dough every morning without applause. Mainstream fact as square as a loaf pan bread aboard ship was rare after the first weeks at sea, replaced by the iron monotony of hardtack. When ships carried flour, it was quickly baked into biscuit ashore twice, or thrice baked for longevity, or consumed fresh in the first days. True risen bread required yeast or sourdough starter stable flour, and conditions the ocean usually denied. Some captains allowed experiments on calm days when galley fires behaved. Others banned it as extravagance. Yet logbooks and journals mentioned soft bread appearing like feast days when flour remained wholesome, and a cook had the nerve, the weather, and the yeast to coax it. In port towns, fresh loaves were the first purchases eaten so fast the crumbs never even saw the scuppers. Your sensory anchors trade tar and brine for flour and heat. The cook tips flour into a pan, pale, dusty puffing clouds that smell like barns and patience. Salt sprinkles with a soft hiss. The starter ladled in sighs like a sleeper turning over. He kneads folding dough over itself with the steady rhythm of someone coaxing a child to trust its own legs. The thud on the board is wet, sticky, persuasive. The dough answers back with elastic protests. His hands glisten with gluten's glue. He wipes them on his apron like a proud father. The deck rocks, but he sways with it as if the ship itself were helping knead. Quirky tidbit to savour in some navies, fresh bread was issued once a week, marked in calendars as though it were a holy day. The French Navy prided itself on issuing fresh bread more often, though sometimes fresh meant yesterday at the port bakery before rats filed complaints. Prison hulks, ironically, sometimes gave prisoners soft bread more regularly than sailors at liberty, because the loaves were cheaper to produce than properly baked biscuit. On Arctic voyages, some cooks tried to bake with snowmelt water, claiming it gave the crumb lightness like cloud. Others swore the same loaves tasted of iron nails. Every ship built its bread theology anew. Another plank of fact pressed firm into the galley bench sourdough starter. The jar on your table is one of humanity's most reliable immigrants. A mixture of flour and water, it captures wild yeasts and lactobacilli that rise wherever grain dust and human breath mingle. Ashore starters lived for decades in clay pots, fed daily producing loaves that tasted like home's particular air. At sea they were harder to keep salt air intruded heat, and damp quarrelled spills starved them, inattentive cooks killed them. Yet when tended they survived voyages and even circumnavigations. Some journals hint at starters carried from port to port, their bubbles trained in 3 oceans, their flavour-telling stories no map could. The scholarly squall warm with footnotes fills the galley. Historians still argue how often true yeast bread appeared at sea. Some insist it was vanishingly rare between provisioning stops, citing endless hardtack rations in logs. Others find scattered evidence of shipboard ovens, brick-built on larger vessels, where fresh bread appeared at least weekly, particularly in Spanish and Dutch fleets. The Royal Navy often baked ashore in victualling yards, but only occasionally attempted it afloat. Merchantmen varied with size, wealth, and captain's temperament. Modern bakers who've experimented at sea point out the challenges dough-proofing in a rolling oven ash, flavouring every bite rats eager for a nibble. Yet they also point out the joy, the smell of baking travelling up the companionway, changing the mood of a watch faster than rum. The dough rests in a covered pot swaying with the ship. The cook sets it near, but not on the galley brick so it can warm without sulking. Men pass and sniff some rolling eyes, others licking lips. The steward writes bread soft in the ledger with a smile that looks unpractised but genuine. You realise you've been leaning forward, knees bent like a supplicant waiting for yeast. Quirky morsel worth noting, some captains demanded sea pies, layered stews of meat vegetables, and dough baked in pans, arguing that this counted as bread stew and celebration in one dish. Others used dough as a lid for meat pudding steamed in cloth, calling it bread by technicality. Logs even record biscuit puddings, hardtack softened, mashed with fat, and molasses baked into something pretending to be cake. None of it equals a true risen loaf, but each speaks to the ship's ingenuity. Bread was not just food, but symbol, memory, morale. Joke quota kneaded gently, you ask the cook if he's sure the starter isn't just last night's dishwater with ambitions. He narrows his eyes and says, "Dishwater," doesn't smile back. Sure enough, the starter bubbles on cue, a grin in yeast. The men laugh, tension easing like dough under a warm cloth. Time slips as the loaf bakes. The galley fills with a smell that silences arguments, warm, nutty, slightly sour, the very definition of hope turning golden. The crust crackles, splits, lifts its shoulders in triumph. Men queue with bowls in hand, not for soup but for slices. The cook raps the bottom of the loaf and it answers with a hollow drumbeat that means it has learned the trick. He slices steam, rising crumb open and moist, crust crisp, and lays wedges atop biscuit as if to apologise for months of hardness. Fact again, because truth deserves butter. Bread's nutritional contribution at sea was starch and solace, but its symbolic weight was heavier. Sailors wrote poems about it, praised it in letters, noted it in logs, as if to remind themselves they were human. Soft bread issued today appears in journals with more joy than pay increases. One surgeon described it as a salve upon the spirit. Another grumbled that men worked better the day after bread, proving labour's loyalty to morale. You bite. The crust resists politely, then yields. The crumb is tangy, airy, sweet, where the flour remembered its youth. Salt pork tastes friendlier against it. Pea soup rises a class. Even plain water feels improved, as if the bread convinced it to behave. Around you the crew chews in reverent silence, broken only by sighs. For a moment the ship is not at war with hunger. A modern aside sidles in with a grin. Back home you'd complain about supermarket bread lasting forever in its plastic coffin full of preservatives. Here you would cheerfully fight a gull for a second slice of sourdough made of 3 ingredients and stubbornness. Perspective like yeast is invisible but transformative. By nightfall, crumbs linger in beards and smiles linger longer than discipline normally allows. The starter jar is fed again, flour and water stirred with respect. So tomorrow may see another loaf if weather permits. You lick your thumb, taste sour salt ash, and find it better than any sweet you remember. You're halfway to sleep when the carpenter strides in with a split-barrel stave and a frown. "Weevils," he says in the flour sack. The cook sets down his knife and sighs the starter, gurgling as if to say, "I warned you, mortals." The room's cheer dims by a shade. Tomorrow may not taste like bread but like arithmetic with insects. But the next duty was even stranger. The carpenter lays the flour sack flat on the bench and taps the canvas. The sound is wrong, too alive, too sandy. When he slits a seam with his knife, the smell comes first, musty, earthy, almost sweet in the wrong way. Then the movement, tiny specks wriggling like punctuation marks gone feral. Pale bodies tunnelling through what should have been tomorrow's loaves. A groan rises from the men crowded around a choir of hunger's disappointment. The cook presses his lips tight, neither surprised nor pleased. "Weevils," he says, voice flat, like naming an old rival. The starter bubbles behind him, oblivious a pet that doesn't care what's in the cupboard, so long as it gets fed. Mainstream fact, set down like a keel infestation, was the perpetual companion of grain at sea. Weevils, beetles, mites, call them what you like. They thrived in the warm, damp rolling holds of long voyages. Flour sacks and biscuit barrels often carried eggs before leaving port. Weeks later the larvae hatched and announced themselves in bread dough, in biscuit holes, in the cook's weary curse. Hardtack often crawled by the second month. Men joked grimly about extra protein, and journals testify to biscuit ground to powder weevil and all then baked again to disguise the movement. Some navies tried scalding biscuit with boiling water before serving. Others issued shake and pick duties where sailors spread biscuits on deck, letting insects crawl away before the bread was mashed into pudding. The pests were a nuisance but rarely fatal, unless morale counted as mortality. Your sensory anchors shift the faint papery rasp of insects scattering when the sack is opened. The flour's hiss as it spills, dappled with specks that shouldn't move. The smell faintly sour, sharp with dust and betrayal. The carpenter curses under his breath, the cook shakes the sack hard, and the bench becomes a miniature storm of white dust and scrambling life. Outside, gulls scream with theatrical hunger, as if mocking your reluctance. Quirky tidbit folded into the mess sailors had rituals for dealing with weevils. Some swore by shaking flour over boiling water drowned pests floating like unwelcome garnish, skimmed off with a grim flourish. Others believed in leaving sacks open overnight so rats would do their duty a partnership. The cook considered questionable at best. On slow days, boys were set to handpick crawling specks from flour, with the patience of monks illuminating manuscripts. Logs mention biscuits toasted hard on shovels over the fire to crisp bugs into forgetfulness. Men joked better to eat them cooked than let them eat you raw. Fat plank number 2, measured like a ration infestations, did not go unrecognised by officials. Naval victualling boards knew their casks and sacks were vulnerable. Biscuit was kiln-dried and triple-baked to discourage life. Flour was sifted, salted, sometimes fumigated with smoke or lime. Yet the sheer time of ocean passages defeated precautions. Biscuit issued at embarkation might be honest. 3 months later it was a garden. Inspectors passed casks as fit for service, while privately knowing fitness was relative. Hungry men discovered that protein walks as well as swims. The scholarly squall drifts in serious and itchy historians still argue how much the insect problem harmed crews physically versus psychologically. Some claim that the caloric contribution of weevils was non-trivial protein and fat at no cost but discussed. Others counter that the psychological toll, the nausea and the refusal of men to eat crawling bread left bellies emptier than the bugs filled. There are anecdotes of sailors preferring starvation to biscuits alive enough to argue. Was insect infestation a crisis or simply a grim joke of life afloat? The truth, as always, is messy enough men ate them to survive. Enough men sickened to fill journals with complaint. The cook demonstrates triage. He sets flour in a shallow pan, slides it into the galley fire, and stirs briskly until the heat persuades motion to cease. The smell is roasted nutty, faintly meaty in a way you'd rather not analyse. Safe enough, he says, tipping it back into the sack. He saves what he can, discards the worst, and marks the sack with a cross reminder that it is to be used quickly. He reminds the men, better bugs cooked than biscuit none. You believe him, but your stomach sends a diplomatic note of protest. Quirky morsel, some captains issued weevil-infested biscuit with rum as consolation, the logic being that complaint is quieter when blurred. Others encouraged the men to crumble biscuit into stews where texture and taste disguised insects. A common jest called this sea pepper. You smile thinly when a messmate claims to prefer his soup with extra crunch. Humour at sea like biscuit survives anything. Joke quota inserted like a nail in oak, you ask the carpenter whether weevils count toward the meat ration. He says deadpan, only if they salute. The cook without looking up adds, mine saluted once. Then I ate him. The men laugh, and the laughter tastes better than the flour. Fact again this time with Empire's ledger ships provisioning in northern Europe, sometimes loaded new flour at one port only to find it infested halfway to Madeira. In warmer seas, bugs bloomed faster. Certain ports earned reputations for clean biscuit or dirty. Madeira's ovens, for instance, were praised, while some Baltic shipments were eyed with suspicion. The East India Company had standing instructions to inspect flour casks rigorously, yet journals still complain. Even warships lined with cannon and discipline were undone by insects no bigger than a fingernail. Your senses adapt grudgingly. The next loaf baked smells fine, tastes tangy from the starter, and if you don't look too close at the flour before kneading, you can believe it's honest. A messmate sprinkles crumbs onto the deck. Gulls swoop with unseemly delight, then fight over the prize. You think briefly that hunger is the great equalizer between bird and man. The scholarly debate reopens one last question. Why didn't navies invest more in airtight containers earlier tin-lined casks existed? Sealed jars were possible. The answer is weight, cost, and habit. Wood was cheap tins, dear, and change slower than sales. By the time metal canisters became practical, steam and refrigeration were arriving to rewrite the script. Until then, men lived with weevils and called it normal. The bell rings. The loaf is cut. Men chew eyes on the middle distance. No one mentions the bugs. No one needs to. The crust is good, the crumb is forgiving, and survival is less about purity than persistence. You swallow taste flour smoke and the faint ghost of beetle, and you decide that disgust is a small price for being alive tomorrow. You're wiping your mouth when a cry comes down from the deck. Fire in the galley, The cook bolts upright, slaps the bench and sprints. You follow stomach tight, knowing that a galley fire is not just flame, it is mutiny by element, a threat to ship and supper alike. The smoke you smell is thicker, darker not bread, but canvas dreaming of ash. But the next duty was even stranger. The cry of fire is never casual aboard a wooden house filled with tar, hemp and canvas. It leaps down the companionway like a curse with claws, and your legs move before your mind remembers they belong to you. The galley is a storm of smoke, black and acrid, pouring from a pan that thought itself a volcano. The cook stands over it, apron flapping, swearing in 4 languages, one of them probably invented just for the occasion. Flames lick the edge of a hanging cloth, eager for travel. Men pile in with buckets, rags, anything wet. The ship itself seems to hold its breath. Mainstream fact, as solid as the keel galley fires, were a sailor's nightmare. Ships in the age of sail were floating bonfires waiting for a match tar caulking, pine planking, pitch-coated ropes, dry sails, powder magazines. The galley was contained in a brick or iron caboose, a small stove box lashed to the deck or tucked below, with strict rules about lighting and tending. Fires were usually allowed only at set times, doused before night watch rekindled under officer's eye. Even then, accidents happened, spilled fat a gust through the door, a spark landing where pitch slept. A single careless flame could consume hull rigging, and every man aboard before boats could be lowered. Fire drills, long before the phrase existed, were discipline, not luxury. Your sensory anchors twist smoke tasting bittersweet like burned onions. Heat flashing your cheeks raw, the clang of a lid dropped to smother the hiss of water on hot iron like a snake denied. The deck thrums with hurried feet. The bell clatters an alarm rhythm. Voices overlap, orders, curses, coughs. Your lungs sting your eyes water, but you keep moving, buckets swinging water, sloshing over your boots. The galley's brick box sweats like a beast. Flames flicker orange in smoke, then vanish as water slaps them down. Quirky tidbit tucked into the panic, some crews swore by tossing flour on flames a disastrous mistake since airborne flour can ignite like cannon smoke. Others spread wet sails over fires, smothering sparks with canvas like a mother tucking in unruly children. Logs mention men pouring beer or brine when fresh water was rationed too tight, smoke flavoured like malt or salt, but at least not flame. There's even one journal that records a galley pan flaring so hot that the cook hurled it overboard, fish and all. The men later joked Neptune had received supper personally. Fact plank number 2, hammered fast naval regulations grew strict after too many wooden coffins were carved by fire. In the Royal Navy, the galley was inspected daily by lieutenants. Sparks were doused with sand, not water if near powder. Lanterns in the hold were locked in horn-covered frames to blunt flame. Smoking pipes was forbidden except in designated spots, often enforced with rope's end. Merchant ships' varied, careful captains lived longer. Careless ones filled newspapers with their epitaphs. A sailor's nose was often the best smoke alarm, the faint whiff of pitch. Too warm canvas, too hot stew, too ambitious. The scholarly squall drifts in stinging eyes like smoke. Historians debate how many fires were recorded versus how many were quietly survived. Some argue that large losses were rare because discipline was ironclad. Others counter that logs omit close calls and charred beams in wrecks tell a quieter story. There's also argument about whether the shift to iron galleys and later to steam heating was driven more by safety or efficiency. The evidence, like smoke, curls into patterns but refuses to stay still. The cook slaps down the pan lid, smothers the last flame and swears he can still smell onions. The carpenter beats sparks from a cloth with his hat. The steward coughs like a cannon, clearing its throat. A boy tips a bucket wrong, splashing the cook to laughter that tastes of relief. Slowly air clears. The galley breathes like a beast calmed. The deck smells of wet ash and ruined supper, but it also smells of ship saved. Quirky morsel, some captains used fire scares as moral sermons. After one such blaze in the Caribbean, a captain famously lined the crew and ordered, "Look left, look right. That's who kept you alive tonight." Another wrote that he carried a bucket of sand everywhere like an extra limb. Still others introduced superstition: no whistling near the galley, it calls the fire. No tossing onion skins toward the stove, they'll ignite curses, always crossing yourself when lighting tinder. You smile at the idea that onion skins could mutiny. Joke quota delivered with coughing humour, you remark that the cook nearly invented smoked hardtack, a delicacy sure to be hated in all ports. He wipes his brow points at the blackened pan and says, You joke, but I'll charge extra for flavour. The crew laughs through soot-streaked teeth. Laughter always finds a bucket of its own. The cook salvages what he can. A pot of charred fat becomes soap for scrubbing. The bread starter mercifully covered still bubbles. He lifts the cloth and grins. See, bread doesn't fear flame. Men cheer absurdly but sincerely because yeast still believes in tomorrow. Fact again, after near fires, captains often increase discipline. Fires restricted to 1 hour a day, smoking ban, tightened inspections doubled. Yet men grumbled less than you'd think they had seen smoke rise where smoke had no right, and fear is the best persuader. Insurance records from the 18th century note fire as one of the greatest hazards second only to storms. You sit on a bucket chest heaving soot on your lips. The smoke tastes bitter but also like a warning swallowed instead of screamed. You think of all the dangers men plan for storms, enemies' reefs, and how often the real killer starts with something small, a spark, a careless cloth, a drop of fat. The ship creaks alive unharmed. You stroke the timber beside you like a grateful dog. Night falls with a quieter wind. Lanterns burn low, heavily guarded. The galley is dark except for the faint glow of coals banked under ash like eyes watching. The cook swears he will try again tomorrow, smaller fire, stricter guard. You nod, knowing that bread is stubborn and men more so. You are nearly calm, eyelids heavy, when a squeak and scamper by the barrel remind you that not all pests come with wings. A rat darts bold across the deck, pauses to glare at you with glossy black eyes, and vanishes toward the flour sacks. The carpenter growls. The cook sighs. The steward mutters, "More mouths we didn't invite." You suddenly remember the jokes about rats tasting like chicken. Hunger and disgust shake hands in your mind. But the next duty was even stranger. The rat leaves a shadow of itself, a quick dart under the sack, the whisper of claws on canvas, the faint musk that is half hayloft, half alley. You freeze. Around you the men mutter curses like prayers run backwards. Rats are not strangers at sea, they are roommates who never paid rent. The carpenter sets down his mallet with intent. The cook shakes his head. Too many to kill one by one, he says. You cut off one fiddle, the orchestra still plays. The steward pulls his ledger close as if numbers can fend off whiskers. Mainstream fact firm as rat-teeth vermin were universal on wooden ships. Rats and mice rode aboard in the food stores, bred in the shadows, gnawed rope, ate biscuit, spoiled flour, nibbled at leather, and occasionally bit sailors asleep in hammocks. They thrived in warm, damp holds with endless crevices and grain. Cats were carried as allies, though cats themselves sometimes became unruly passengers. Rats spread disease plague in earlier centuries, fevers in later ones, and their waste-tainted stores. Yet they were tolerated to a degree because eradication was near impossible without steel and poison. Men learned to live with them, as with storms, complain, fight when able, endure when not. Your sensory anchors switch to vermin's world. The scuttle of tiny feet across beams, the sharp scritch of teeth on wood, the faint ammoniac tang of droppings, the occasional squeal like a rusty hinge. You feel the deck shift under your boots, and wonder if it's just the swell or the rats themselves moving in unison, an army you can't see. In the dark corners of the galley, eyes glint like spilled ink catching light. Quirky tidbit tucked in a barrel, sailors sometimes held rat-hunting contests on slow days. A cat was loosed into the hold. Men cheered it on like a prize-fighter. Logs record cats earning names, ranks even half rations of milk for diligence. A famous frigate's cat, Mrs. Chippy, became a crew mascot. Another trim sailed with Matthew Flinders and earned immortality in journals. When cats failed, sailors set traps, simple sprung boards, buckets baited with biscuit, even sticky tar patches that turned into accidental rat museums. One French log tells of men skewering rats, roasting them over the galley fire and calling it sea rabbit. You grimace, but hunger has no shame. Fact plank number 2, written with sharp nibs, vermin damage extended beyond food. Rats gnawed rope lashings, weakened sails, bolt ropes, and sometimes even chewed into powder barrels, making them deadly saboteurs. They shredded clothing, burrowed into bedding, and kept men awake with nocturnal opera. Surgeons wrote complaints of rat bites festering. Yet paradoxically, in desperate famine, rats became resource Arctic explorers, ate them gladly, and famine journals note rat stew saving lives. The line between pest and pantry was sometimes only as wide as the cook's knife. The scholarly squall restless as a gnawed beam, historians debate how much of shipboard hunger was due to rats. Some argue that infestations reduced flour and biscuit stores by alarming amounts, citing estimates of several ounces per rat per day, multiplied by hundreds of stowaways. Others suggest sailors exaggerated, making rats scapegoats for corrupt purses or spoiled cargo. Modern archaeological studies of wreck sites show gnawed bones, chewed cloth rat droppings among preserved stores, proof the sailors weren't inventing their complaints. But the numbers are elusive. Rats lived in shadows and died in silence, their senses hidden. The carpenter sets traps baited with onion skins, muttering about reclaiming his ship. The cook sets the cat loose grey-scarred tail, kinked from some old fight. The cat slinks into the shadow's eyes, glowing tail twitching, and the men cheer like gamblers. A squeal, a scramble, then silence. The cat returns, licking its paw, casual as an admiral. Morale rises like bread. Quirky morsel rats, despite being pests, sometimes became pets. Lonely sailors fed them crumbs, trained them to sit on shoulders, even smuggled them ashore. Rats sailed unintentionally to every corner of the world, carrying European stowaways to Pacific islands, Caribbean coys and Arctic harbours. Entire ecosystems changed because some sailor left a biscuit unguarded. The rat in its way was as much a navigator as the captain. Joke quota pulled from Shadows, you remark that the rats should be given hammocks since they've clearly earned their rations. The steward deadpans. They'd just chew the ropes, the cook adds. At least they'd sleep in shifts. Laughter cuts the fear's edge, though everyone still checks their bread twice before biting. Fact again, steady the Royal Navy tried fumigation with burning sulphur or vinegar, choking holds with smoke while men held their breath and rats fled or died. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it only made everything smell like a bad tavern. Traps, cats, ferrets, all were tried. Yet the ship always sailed again with a gnawing chorus. Rats were permanent crew. Your senses adjust unwillingly. The night sounds now include a layer of skitter, a percussion beneath the sail's song. You wonder if the rats dream of wheat fields as you dream of fruit. Hunger binds species more than anyone admits. The scholarly debate turns one more screw: did men exaggerate the flavour of rat meat? Journals record it as agreeable like rabbit when hunger pressed. Others call it musky, bitter, hard. Modern tests on similar fare suggest both can be true depending on age cooking and imagination. The line between revulsion and relief is thin as biscuit crumbs. By dawn, traps hold 3 bodies. The cat yawns, full and smug. The carpenter nails holes in flour sacks. The cook mixes what's left into starter, shaking his head. Men chew breakfast slowly, imagining whiskers in every mouthful, yet they eat. Survival makes strange company. You wipe your lips, the taste of flour and suspicion lingering. The gulls wheel above, shrieking laughter. The bell tolls 6, the ship turns into wind. You lean against the rail, and in the corner of your eye see a shadow ripple along the deck beam. Rat or rope, you can't tell. Your stomach knots anyway. Knots. Then the surgeon appears again, notebook in hand, frown deepening. He points not to pests, but to men 3 lying weak in hammocks, joints stiff, gums blackening despite yesterday's citrus ration. Not vermin, he says, voice grave. Something deeper. The word scurvy doesn't even need repeating. It hangs already in the air like damp canvas, and the cook's citrus sack looks thinner than it did. But the next duty was even stranger. The hammocks creak under bodies that have grown suddenly light. Men who were pulling lines a week ago now lie curled, limbs stiff, eyes dulled, breath shallow as whispers. The surgeon moves from hammock to hammock with his ledger, the way a priest moves with a missal, recording symptoms in neat Latin and messy sighs. He pinches a man's shin. The skin blooms purple with the faintest touch. He peers into another's mouth, gums swollen, teeth trembling in their sockets, like passengers eager to disembark. Around them, the air smells of vinegar, old sweat, and something darker sickness that has learned how to linger. You hold your cup of lime water, and it tastes suddenly small. Mainstream fact, clear and bitter scurvy was the great spectre of ocean voyaging, killing more sailors than storms or battles until the late 18th century. Estimates suggest that in the age of discovery, entire crews could dwindle to a fraction, with hundreds lost on single voyages. Vasco da Gama's fleet returned from India with most men dead. Magellan's circumnavigation limped home with only 18 survivors, out of 270 scurvy, gnawing silently alongside hunger and mutiny. Symptoms began after weeks without fresh produce: lethargy, swelling, bleeding gums, loose teeth, old wounds reopening, depression. By the time hammocks held skeletons, more than men captains wrote logs that sounded like funerals in ink. Your sensory anchors take you into the sick bay, the thready sound of men breathing like damp bellows, the faint rattle of tin cups, the hush of canvas straining above. The surgeon's quill scratches like a nail in wood, noting purpura and spongiosa gingivarum. Somewhere a gull laughs outside, obscene in its health. You lift a hammock edge. The sailor inside opens eyes rimmed red and whispers for cider, for onion, for home. You have nothing but water soured with lime and a poor joke stuck in your throat. Quirky tidbit, unsettling, but true shipmates believed onions rubbed on gums might strengthen them, even when teeth already listed like bad cargo. Some swore by chewing spruce tips their resin, sharp as needles but oddly soothing. Others tried malt wort as sweet liquid. Brewers loved, but sailors called barley's apology. Logs note peculiar cures burying sick men up to the neck in warm sand on tropical beaches. A bizarre therapy attempted in desperation, feeding them seawater, as if salt could stitch wounds, or dosing them with elixirs of mercury and vinegar brewed by ambitious quacks. Few of these did more than pass time. Fact plank number 2, set down firmly by the late 1700s, citrus proved itself again and again, yet captains varied in how well they managed it. Lemon juice restored gums and lives when issued fresh and daily. Sauerkraut supplemented with its quiet bacterial gift. Fresh meat surprisingly provided enough vitamin C to matter when hunted or bartered. Still, storage sabotaged many cures. Lime juice boiled until dead barrels left too long fruit hoarded until rot. The line between salvation and mockery was thin as a peel. The scholarly squall returns insistent as waves against hull historians argue why scurvy persisted decades after cures were known. Some blame economics. Mediterranean lemons cost more than West Indian limes, so the Admiralty economized into failure. Others faulted ignorance of storage chemistry. Boiled juice seemed practical, but destroyed the very essence needed. Some emphasize culture captains suspicious of fads, surgeons unwilling to adopt what they couldn't explain. Was scurvy's persistence bureaucracy ignorance, or simply the inertia of wooden empires? The debate creaks like old timbers but never collapses entirely. The cook squeezes the last sack of limes into buckets, doling out thin rations. He saves peels, grates them into pea pudding, anything to stretch virtue farther. The steward sighs as if numbers alone can cure men. The carpenter nails shelves higher to keep flour away from rats, muttering that at least vermin don't loosen teeth. You sip the sour water. It bites your tongue, but doesn't quiet the ache in your gums. Quirky morsel worth saving. Some captains desperate landed on barren coasts and made scurvy grass salads of whatever greens sprouted: sorrel, dandelion, even seaweed. Logs describe men reviving after chewing fistfuls of grass like cattle, their colour returning within days. In polar voyages, seal liver or penguin meat did the trick, though journals call it foul and rank. Desperation made delicacies. You wonder what you'd chew if the surgeon handed you a weed. Joke quota limping but alive, you tell a messmate that your teeth are planning mutiny, demanding shore leave. He groans and replies, "Tell them they're already loose, they can swim for it." The laughter is weak, but it moves through hammocks like a breeze. Even a bad joke is medicine when the galley has none. Fact again, steady as canvas in a fair wind scurvy, wasn't just physical but psychological. Logs describe apathy, spreading men refusing to rise for watches, lying in hammocks, humming dirges. Captains feared the scurvy mood as much as bleeding gums, because discipline frays when hope dies. Officers sometimes forced men on deck for air, and a light believing morale to be a cure. Modern medicine nods depression and deficiency are brothers. Your senses mark the rhythm of decline, the cough of a mate who hauled lines last week. The soft weeping of a boy staring at swollen legs. The rustle of the surgeon turning pages, refusing to let silence win. The ship sails on its timbers, groaning under canvas, but below deck feels like stillness creeping. You chew a lime wedge to prove something to yourself. It stings. It heals nothing yet, but its bitterness feels like a promise. Scholarly debate closes with a cruel irony. Scurvy all but vanished in navies that enforced citrus, yet persisted in merchantmen where cost cut deeper than science. The word limey meant as sneer became quiet proof of survival. Meanwhile, land armies without fresh supplies still suffered proof that the sea was not the only battlefield. The lesson seemed simple: fruit saves, but the practice was anything but. By night, hammocks sway in slow unison, a cradle for pain. The surgeon lights one lantern, low scribbles with quill scratching like teeth chattering. You lie awake, tasting lime on your tongue, wondering if it will hold you intact. The ship creaks. The gulls are gone, the stars stare down with indifference. Then a hail comes from the masthead's sail. The quarterdeck stirs, spyglasses snap open. A merchantman broad and heavy crawling east. The captain's voice rides the wind. We'll speak her. The surgeon looks up from his book, hope flickering. Fruit greens, or more barrels of biscuit with bugs. Your jaw aches at the thought. But the next duty was even stranger. The cool sail hoe rolls down the shrouds, and suddenly the ship is less a coffin and more a question. Men drag themselves from hammocks, some steady, some tottering eyes sharp with hunger disguised as hope. The other vessel grows on the horizon, her sails fat with wind, her hull broad painted trim catching sun like jewellery. The captain studies her through the long glass jaw, tight words clipped. A merchantman. Eastbound. He doesn't say with what because no one knows yet. Around you the air thickens not with smoke or sickness, but anticipation edible as bread. Mainstream fact grounded like an anchor provisioning at sea often depended on speaking other ships. When two vessels sighted each other in blue emptiness, they exchanged hails, origin, destination, weather, health, need. Sometimes it was courtesy, sometimes commerce, sometimes charity. Merchantmen carrying fruit, onions, greens, or even livestock could sell or trade supplies at high price. Naval vessels sometimes took by requisition, paying later with vouchers or promises. These mid-ocean markets kept many crews alive between official ports. Logs bristle with entries like spoke a Portuguese brig, obtained oranges and onions. Each meeting was survival disguised as diplomacy. Your sensory anchors sharpen the flap of canvas as your ship braces, the creak of yards swinging, the shrill call of the boatswain's pipe summoning order. Men gather at the rail, their teeth chattering not with cold but with anticipation. The smell of tar and sweat merges with a faint whiff carried across the waterfruit maybe, or just your imagination knitting desire out of wind. The deck thrums as guns are run out, not in threat but in tradition, a reminder that courtesy is safest when backed by iron. Quirky tidbit worth grinning at exchanges weren't always fruit and onions. Sailors bartered tobacco rum books, even a fiddle in one log swapped for a sack of lemons. Another tale tells of a captain trading a cannonball polished bright and useless at that range for 3 cabbages. There are stories of men begging for potatoes and being handed them one by one from laughing crews. And one improbable log claims a monkey was swapped for a barrel of sauerkraut. The monkey became the ship's mascot, the sauerkraut saved 6 men's gums. Historians raise eyebrows, but journals rarely joke about sauerkraut. Fact plank number 2, steady as a yardarm, these exchanges could prevent mutiny as much as starvation. Men sick with scurvy watched the horizon with double eyes, one for wind, one for strangers. A sighted sail might mean rescue, might mean disappointment. Captains knew morale rode the outcome. A cask of citrus could calm a crew like rum never did. Logs describe men cheering, singing, even weeping when fresh produce came aboard. Conversely, disappointment fed fury. One mutiny case in the late 1600s cites no fresh provisions for months as a spark. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was loyalty in barrels. The scholarly squall arrives persistent as seagulls historians debate how much mid-ocean barter truly mattered to survival statistics. Some claim the occasional trades were drops in the bucket compared to planned provisioning. Others insist journals overemphasize them because memory burns brightest on feast days. Still others argue that morale impossible to measure was the true treasure of these encounters. Did oranges really prevent death en masse, or did their hope steady discipline long enough for the ship to reach port? The truth, like the sea, contains more than one current. The speaking trumpet booms, voices stretch thin across water, from Lisbon, bound for Rio, the answer crackles back, Holland, East Indies, questions volley. What stores? What sickness? The merchantman obliges oranges, onions, sugar, rice. Your heart does a small, undisciplined dance. The captain orders a boat lowered, silver jingles from the purser's chest. The surgeon stands by with his ledger like a priest with rosary. Quirky morsel flavoured by gossip, sometimes these mid-ocean exchanges turned into floating parties. Crews shouted songs back and forth, traded jokes, even passed bottles across on long poles. On one recorded occasion, 2 ships lashed together for half a day, men from both crews feasting on fresh goat stew before parting with cheers. Another journal describes a captain sending his compliments with a wedge of cheese and receiving a pineapple in return. These moments became legend retold in folksals for years as proof the sea occasionally remembered kindness. Joke quota delivered with salt as the boats are lowered, you tell a mate you'd trade your hammock for a cabbage. He says, only cabbage would agree to that smell. You laugh, though your teeth ache in protest. Humour keeps pace with hunger. Fact again, pulled straight from the surgeon's neat hand. The men most ill are brought small sips of citrus water first, because their bodies can't take too much acid at once. He knows too much too fast could worsen their weakness. Better to coax life back sip by sip. He murmurs reassurance, though his eyes count the oranges like coins. The healthy men eye the baskets too, discipline holding them in check. For now, the boat returns heavy with treasure net bags bulging with oranges, strings of onions, sacks of rice. The smell rises before the boat even touches hull. Men crowd the rail, the boatswain barking them back. The cook seizes a sack, presses an orange to his nose, and sighs like a man tasting home. The surgeon begins squeezing at once, catching juice in a clean cask. The steward notes every piece, voice sharp, pen sharper. Scholarly aside, because the debate never sleeps, some modern historians point out that citrus intake at these chance meetings may have been enough to turn the tide of whole voyages, saving dozens of lives. Others caution that evidence is scattered journals, uneven numbers, uncertain. Yet when you see colour flush back into men's faces after a day of oranges, arguments seem irrelevant. The proof lies in the hammocks sighing easier. Your sensory anchors swell with relief, the sound of peel tearing, juice squirting, men licking fingers. The smell sharp, sweet, real cutting through bilge and sweat like sunlight through fog. The sight of men chewing slowly, eyes closed as if trying to memorize the taste forever. You bite into your own orange. The juice floods your mouth, stings, your sores runs down your chin. You laugh with the others, sticky and undignified, and it feels like life has come aboard in bright round boats. Quirky morsel to carry in your pocket, sailors often dried peels on lines strung across the deck, later grinding them into spice for puddings. Some kept peels as charms tucked into sea chests, reminders of the day the horizon gave back kindness. Archaeologists even find preserved citrus peels in wrecks centuries later, fragile relics of hope. The sun sets as the merchantman dwindles westward, her sails glowing pink. Men sit chewing onions, raw eyes watering, laughing at the burn. The surgeon nods to himself as gums stop bleeding within days. The cook saves rice for tomorrow, planning pudding with sugar like an alchemist promising gold. The captain notes the trade in his log, terse as ever, but you sense relief in the set of his shoulders. The deck quiets. Lanterns swing. Your belly is full of orange and onion, your gums sting, but feel firmer, your spirits ride higher than the yards. You close your eyes to savour the aftertaste, and then the boatswain mutters almost to himself. Funny thing, though. Sometimes too much plenty makes men restless. You blink. Could a full belly stir rebellion as easily as an empty one? Discipline hangs as delicate as citrus peel drying in the wind. But the next duty was even stranger. The ship rides easier now, belly fuller with onions, rice, citrus stacked in hammocks. Men chewing with a vigour that sounds like gratitude. For a day or two, even the sickest hammocks stir eyes brighter gums, less bloody colour crawling cautiously back into cheeks. Relief tastes so good you nearly forget what hunger feels like. Yet relief is dangerous when stretched too thin. The men sing louder, gamble longer, and grumble quicker when rations don't favour them. A full belly makes a man remember other debts. The captain's strictness, the purser's scales, the cook's stinginess with fat. You sense it in the way laughter rings too sharp, at mess the way men's eyes flicker when the officers walk by. Mainstream fact firm as oak food has always been the pivot of discipline at sea. Rations symbolised fairness and authority. To shortchange a man's portion was to invite mutiny. Many famous uprisings list bad provisions among grievances. HMS Bounty's men resented Bligh's obsession with breadfruit, and his strict rationing seeing him eat fresh food they could not. Merchantmen mutinied when biscuit turned to dust, when salt meat stank of rot, when officers hoarded wine. In the diaries of long voyages one finds not just storms and reefs, but pages about spoiled pork unfair distribution, or the rumour that the captain dined better than the crew. Hunger gnawed discipline as surely as ropes gnawed wood. Your sensory anchors sharpen in this uneasy quiet, the creak of cards slapped too hard on the mess table, the hiss of whispered complaints in hammocks, the metallic scrape of knives sharpened longer than necessary. The citrus smell, once joy, now hangs like temptation. You taste tension in the pea pudding, though the peas themselves are innocent. The deck groans in rhythm, but the crew's harmony falters. Quirky tidbit, almost absurd sailors staged mock food parliaments, electing members to complain about rations in sing-song speeches, a safety valve that officers tolerated when it stayed comic. On other ships, they crowned a king biscuit a man with the hardest bread who led chants about the cook's cruelty. Sometimes these carnivals kept mutiny at bay by turning fury into farce. Other times the laughter turned sharp, the parody too true, and the line between jest and rebellion vanished. Fact plank number 2, set down like ballast mutinies, were rarely about one grievance. They were storms built of many squalls, but provisions almost always featured. On HMS Defiance 1797, men's complaints included weevil biscuit, short beer, and unequal rum. The Great Spithead and Nore mutinies cited bad victuals alongside pay. Even in merchant service logs of near rebellions mention flour, spoiled beef, putrid, and captains eating fresh fowl in sight of starving men. Officers knew a fair hand with the ladle could soothe tempers, a stingy one could spark knives. The scholarly squall insistent and ink-stained historians still argue how central food truly was to mutiny. Some see it as excuse men complained about rations but rebelled for pay politics or cruelty. Others argue food was primal, pay could be promised later, flogging endured, but hunger today broke men's loyalty. Modern research into naval logs shows spikes in desertion and mutiny, coinciding with provisioning crises. Was food the match, or simply the tinder waiting for spark? Perhaps both. A belly full of rot does not obey orders easily. The cook feels it too. He guards his sacks like treasure counts onions, twice doles citrus with visible fairness. He jokes louder, swears, friendlier, but his eyes dart like lanterns in wind. The purser locks his chest more often, as if silver and lemons weighed the same. The captain stands stiffer on deck, his plate discreetly plain in public, though rumours swirl that his cabin holds wine and cheese. Rumours at sea breed like weevils. Quirky morsel, some captains staged feasts during doldrums, turning food into theatre. They roasted a pig if one survived the voyage, brewed punch, issued double rations, let music play. These doldrum feasts raised spirits, reminding men the voyage was still human. But feast could backfire. When food was too fine, men muttered that officers held back more. When food was too thin, men muttered that the captain mocked them. Balance was knife's edge. Joke quota brittle as biscuit, you tell your messmate that with all these onions you'll mutiny only against the smell. He grins, weakly replies, "At least if we hang, the rope will cry for us." Laughter spills, but it has teeth. Fact again, steady captains feared mutiny above storm and enemy because it rose from within. Food was the daily test of loyalty. A man could forgive foul weather, not foul meat. Journals describe captains inspecting messes, personally tasting broth, breaking biscuits, showing fairness to keep peace. Others delegated to pursers and paid with riots. Leadership at sea came with a ladle as much as a sword. Your sensory anchors take one more note, the hush after mess, the clink of spoons. Quieter than before, the sigh of hammocks swinging but not sleeping. You feel the ship rolling on, but the crew rolls restless. The surgeon watches eyes narrow, perhaps fearing sickness of the spirit as much as of the gums. The scholarly debate closes with irony. Historians now see mutinies as complex negotiations, men asserting rights within wooden nations. But for those inside hammocks, the negotiation was simpler fair food, or none justice, or knives. The ledger of empire was written in oranges as much as orders. Night falls, lanterns dim. The crew settles into uneasy silence. You taste orange still on your tongue, but it feels sharper now, like a reminder of both life and danger. The sea sighs, gulls are gone, stars scatter indifferently above. And then after the hush, the lookout calls land. The word cracks the air, cuts tension like citrus through brine. Landfall, safe harbour, fresh-bred green hills. Men cheer, voices ragged but real. Yet the captain, tight-lipped, mutters, "Safe harbour isn't always safe." You feel your heart surge with relief, then stumble with doubt. What waits on shore may be stranger than hunger, but the next duty was even stranger. Land. The word rolls across the deck like thunder given a human voice. Every man who can walk rushes to the rail eyes, straining past salt-crusted lashes. There it is, a smudge of green and brown rising from the grey horizon, edges soft in haze, top brushed with cloud. After weeks of endless water, it looks unreal, like a painting someone nailed to the horizon just to test your sanity. The ship leans toward it, with eagerness sails trimmed tighter, lines humming like harp strings in wind. The smell reaches you before the harbour does damp earth, distant wood smoke, the sharp breath of foliage. To men sick of tar sweat and brine, it smells like forgiveness. Mainstream fact, steady as stone landfall was salvation and hazard alike. Safe harbours provided fresh water, fruits, vegetables, sometimes livestock, always variety. Sailors stumbled ashore to eat grass like cattle, to bite onions raw, to gulp milk, to trade coin for cabbages with trembling hands. These first days often reversed the slow death of scurvy reviving crews within a week. Yet harbours could be treacherous disease ashore, prices gouged by clever merchants, hostile authorities, or politics turning a port into trap. Some ports were famous for kindness, Madeira, Rio, the Cape. Others were infamous for robbing crews with both prices and infection. Your sensory anchors drink greedily, gulls crying overhead, swooping in celebration. The slap of waves against shallower ground. The smell of mudflats rank but new. The creak of anchor cable paying out heavy and sure. Men lean over the rail, breathing deep as if they could cure themselves with air alone. A sailor near you whispers, "Green. Look at the green." He says it like prayer, as though the colour itself could mend him. Quirky tidbit to savour, in some ports local sold sailors' salads assembled on the spot. Handfuls of cress, wild sorrel, dandelion leaves wrapped in cloth or even in paper cones. Crews called these grass bundles, chewed them greedily, and swore they tasted better than beef. Other ports specialised. Rio was famed for oranges, Cape Town for cabbages, Madeira for wine and lemons. On St Helena, whole gardens were planted expressly for ships. Passing captains noted cabbages as large as children, watercress crisp as snow. Sailors gorged until stomachs rebelled, then laughed through the cramps. Fact plank number 2. Firm as Kielson harbour provisioning was not merely convenience but strategy. Admiralties instructed captains to seek out refreshing ports, often listing them in pilot books as carefully as dangerous reefs. Dutch and Portuguese empires built victualling stations across oceans. The British later formalised whole networks. These outposts became lifelines of empire gardens turned into geopolitics fruit trees, planted as defence as surely as cannon. Food kept ships at sea, and whoever owned the gardens owned the world's highways. The scholarly squall, gentle but persistent historians still argue how much landfall alone cured scurvy, versus how much constant provisioning was required. Some point to journals showing miraculous recoveries in ports, men rising from hammocks within days of eating oranges and cress. Others caution that relapses occurred when ships went to sea again without steady supply. Was landfall cure or merely reprieve? Modern science says both. Vitamin C floods the body stitches, collagen anew, gums, firm bruises fade, but once fruit is gone, the clock starts ticking again. A week's green cannot cover 3 months' blue. The first boat goes ashore with casks for water. You're not in it, but you watch with envy as men wade into surf boots sinking in sand they haven't felt in months. The captain signals trade for fruit, onions, anything green, pay fair, keep discipline. The cook mutters that fare is relative when men are hungry. Quirky morsel. Some sailors brought animals aboard from ports, goats for milk, chickens for eggs, pigs for meat. These shipboard menageries bleated and clucked in the hold, providing both food and amusement. Logs tell of pigs escaping chickens, laying eggs in hammocks, goats chewing charts. Yet their presence meant survival when weeks stretched thin. Other ships bought living turtles stacked upside down on deck, kept alive until needed. A cruel but practical pantry. Joke quota sunlit this time, you tell your messmate you'll kiss the first cabbage you see. He grins and says, "Just don't let the captain see you propose to it." Laughter breaks tension, men nearly giddy. Hunger makes clowns of all. Fact again, plain sailors ashore often overindulged. After weeks of biscuit and salt meat, they devoured fresh produce until stomachs revolted. Journals describe men doubled over in grass after eating melons whole, or vomiting bright orange after swallowing a dozen oranges in one sitting. Surgeons sometimes rationed fruit to prevent harm, but sailors hid it in coats and boots, unwilling to waste a bite. Recovery was messy, but it was life. Your sensory anchors brighten the crunch of onion in your teeth, sharp but glorious. The juice of an orange running down your chin, the fresh ache of gums that suddenly feel alive again. Around you, men laugh, cough, eat, and cry all at once. The cook prepares a pot with cabbage onions, a splash of vinegar, the smell rising like hymn. The surgeon notes improvements, already less bleeding, more laughter. Scholarly aside, because history never sleeps, ports also brought danger. Tropical harbours carried malaria, yellow fever, dysentery. Men went ashore for healing and came back with death. Prostitution and drink drained purses and discipline alike. Admirals weighed the calculus: was fresh fruit worth the risk of fever? Was rest worth riot? Some captains restricted shore leave, others encouraged it. Historians argue which policy saved more lives. Evidence points both ways. As night falls, lanterns burn brighter. Bell strikes slower. The ship lies at anchor, bellies full, hearts lighter. You lean on the rail, chewing green shoots, staring at a shoreline where smoke curls from huts, dogs bark, and the world smells of soil. The sea rests for now, the hammocks swing easier, the surgeon closes his ledger without a sigh. And yet amid laughter the captain murmurs to the first mate, "Tomorrow we set sail again. Gardens don't last at sea." The words are true and men know it. This landfall is reprieve, not salvation. Still tonight you let your body believe in cabbages and oranges, in the feel of earth, scent in lungs, in green leaves crunching louder than worry. But as you drift towards sleep, one thought pricks like a splinter: food has saved you today, but the sea never stops asking. Tomorrow it will ask again. And the next duty was even stranger. And now, with the story's sails furled and the last watch set, it's time to let the ship grow quiet. You've tramped through biscuit bins and onion ropes, through barrels of salt beef and jars of sauerkraut, through sickness in hammocks and citrus miracles in netted bags. You've seen rats become both thief and supper fires licked out in the galley, and bread coaxed from stubborn starter, while the floor rolled like a cradle. You've listened to gulls scold to bells, mark the hours, to water slap patiently at planks, to men sighing with both hunger and relief. Now the voyage eases into harbour inside your mind. The wind drops to a soft breath against canvas. The bells grow slower, as if even bronze wants rest. The hammocks sway gently, not from storm, but from the ship's quiet heartbeat, timbers creaking like a lullaby. The sharpness of citrus fades to memory. The bitterness of scurvy dissolves into distance. All that remains is the rocking rhythm, the smell of tar and rope grown calm, the faint shuffle of waves like sheets being drawn up to your chin. In this stillness, let your body loosen like a rope uncoiled, every knot easing, every line slackening. Imagine lying in your own hammock, the sea carrying you steady, the stars watching but no longer judging. The noise of complaint has ebbed, the laughter has softened, and only the hush of the ocean remains. Every breath you take now is deeper, slower, like the tide itself moving in and out, patient and eternal. The ship drifts, but you needn't follow it anymore. You can let the journey slip away like wake, fading into darkness until even the memory of hunger is gone. All that's left is warmth, comfort, and the certainty that tomorrow will bring breadfruit and calm waters. So close your eyes. Listen to the stillness. Let the ocean's steady rocking guide you into sleep, into a harbour with no storms and no watches left to stand.